What if Robb Stark killed Jaime Lannister after capturing him? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The morning mist hangs heavy over the Whispering Wood as Robb Stark stands among the bodies of the fallen. The battle is over. Victory belongs to the North. Around him, his bannermen move through the carnage, binding wounds and counting prisoners. The Golden Lion banners of House Lannister lie trampled in the mud, their bright silk now stained with blood and dirt. Robb stares down at the most valuable prize of all. Jaime Lannister sits propped against an oak tree, his hands bound behind his back, his golden armor dented and blooded. The Kingslayer's perfect face bears a cut across one cheek, but his green eyes burn with the same arrogance they've always held. Even in defeat, even as a prisoner, Jaime Lannister refuses to bow. "Well, well," Jaime says, his voice carrying across the quiet battlefield. "The young wolf has learned to bare his fangs. Tell me, boy king, do you feel like a conqueror now?" The words hit Robb like physical blows. Boy king. The same words Robert Baratheon might have used, the same dismissal he's heard whispered in corners since taking the crown. But there's something else in Jaime's tone, something that cuts deeper than mere mockery. "I feel like a king who has captured the man who tried to murder his brother," Robb says. His voice carries the authority he's learned to project, but underneath runs a current of barely controlled fury. Jaime's laugh is cold and sharp. "Tried? Oh, my sweet summer child. I didn't try anything. I succeeded. The little lordling went out that window like a stone from a catapult. Crack, right onto the courtyard stones." The words hang in the air like poison. Around them, the northern soldiers pause in their work. Lord Karstark steps closer, his weathered face twisted with rage. The Blackfish emerges from the tree line, his sword still bloody from the battle. Even Theon Greyjoy stops counting prisoners to stare at the golden-haired knight who speaks so casually of attempted murder. "You're lying," Robb says, but his voice wavers. In his heart, he knows Jaime speaks the truth. The way Bran fell, the way he couldn't remember what happened before the accident, the way Jaime and Cersei had been so eager to leave Winterfell after Robert's departure. "Am I?" Jaime tilts his head, studying Robb with those calculating green eyes. "Your brother saw something he shouldn't have, something that would have meant death for me, for my sister, for our children. So I did what any man would do to protect his family. I pushed the little bird from his nest." Lord Rickard Karstark spits in the dirt. The bastard admits it freely. "My lord, give me leave to take his head. Justice demands it." "Justice," Jaime repeats, and his smile is sharp as broken glass. "How noble of you all. Tell me about justice while your father rots in a black cell beneath the Red Keep. Tell me about justice when his head decorates a spike above the gates of King's Landing." The mention of Ned Stark hits the gathering like a thunderbolt. Robb's hand moves instinctively to the pommel of his sword. Ice, his father's great two-handed blade, hangs heavy at his side. Valyrian steel, forged in old Valyria before the Doom, passed down through generations of Stark kings and lords. "My father is a prisoner," Robb says carefully. "Not a dead man. A prisoner today," Jaime agrees. "But for how long? How long before sweet Joffrey decides that keeping him alive serves no purpose? How long before my sister whispers the right words in the right ears?" He leans forward as much as his bonds allow. "Do you think your father's honor will protect him in the dungeons of King's Landing? Do you think your mercy will save his life?" The truth of it burns in Robb's chest. Every day that passes brings news of more injustices from the capital. Ned Stark, the most honorable man in the Seven Kingdoms, branded a traitor and locked away like a common criminal. For what crime? Speaking the truth about Joffrey's bastard birth. for refusing to bend the knee to a false king. You have something they want, Theon Greyjoy says quietly, moving closer to the group. The Kingslayer himself. Surely that's worth 1,000 Ned Starks to them. Jaime's eyes glitter with malicious amusement. Oh, my young friend speaks wisdom. Yes, I am worth quite a bit to certain people. My sister values me highly. My father would empty the gold mines of Casterly Rock to see me returned safely home. He pauses, letting the implication hang in the air. Of course, that would require keeping me alive, and whole, and unharmed. The Blackfish steps forward, his armor still bearing dents from the battle. Sir Brynden Tully has fought in more wars than most men have seen winters, and his face shows the weight of every campaign. The boy has a point, Robb. A living Jaime Lannister is worth more than a dead one. We could trade him for your father, for your sisters. Could we? Robb asks, but he's not really asking it them. He's asking himself, asking the part of him that still believes in honor and justice and mercy. Could we really trust them to honor such an exchange? You could try, Jaime says, and now his voice takes on a more serious tone. You could send ravens to King's Landing, offer terms, promise to return the great Sir Jaime Lannister in exchange for Ned Stark's freedom. And perhaps, if you're very lucky and very naive, they might even agree. But you don't believe they would, Robb says. I believe my sister is marred with grief and rage. I believe my nephew is a sadistic little monster who enjoys watching people suffer. I believe my father is a man who understands that sometimes you must cut away the diseased flesh to save the body. Jaime's smile returns, cold and knowing. What I believe, young wolf, is that your father is already a dead man. The only question is whether his death will buy you anything useful. Lord Karstark's hand rests on his sword hilt. My lord, this snake speaks only to poison your thoughts. Give the word, and I'll silence his lying tongue forever. Lying? Jaime laughs again. About which part? About pushing your brother from the tower? I've already confessed to that crime. About your father's fate? Look around you, boy. Look at the world you live in. Honor is a luxury the dead can afford. The living must make harder choices. Robb stares at the bound prisoner, this man who speaks so casually of murder and betrayal, this man who crippled Bran without a moment's hesitation, this man whose family has brought nothing but misery to House Stark. In his mind, he can see Bran lying broken in his bed, his legs useless, his dreams of knighthood shattered forever. He can see his father in a dark cell, paying the price for speaking truth to power. You're right about one thing, Robb says finally. Honor is a luxury. But justice? He draws ice from its sheath, and the Valyrian steel sings as it slides free. The blade is as long as a man is tall, its edges sharp enough to cut shadow. Justice is a necessity. Jaime's eyes widen slightly as he sees the great sword, but his smile never wavers. Ah, so the young wolf shows his teeth at last. Tell me, Your Grace, do you mean to execute a bound prisoner in cold blood? How very kingly of you. I mean to execute a child killer, Robb says. A man who tried to murder my brother. A man who has confessed his crimes before witnesses. Without trial? Without allowing me to call for champions or speak in my own defense? Jaime shakes his head in mock disappointment. And here I thought the Starks prized themselves on their honor. You'll have the same trial you gave Bran, Robb replies, the same mercy you showed a 10-year-old boy. The silence stretches between them. Around the small circle, the northern lords and soldiers watch their young king with a mixture of approval and unease. This is the moment that will define everything that follows. The moment when Robb Stark chooses between the old ways and the new reality. "Do it," Lord Karstark growls. "The bastard deserves no better than he gave." "Think carefully, nephew," the Blackfish says quietly. "A dead enemy is no threat, but a dead hostage is no use either." Theon Greyjoy says nothing, but his dark eyes watch Robb intently, measuring the boy he's known since childhood, against the king who now holds a man's life in his hands. Robb hefts ice, feeling the perfect balance of the ancient blade. He thinks of Bran, broken and sleeping in his tower room. He thinks of his father, caged like an animal in the capital. He thinks of Sansa and Arya, trapped in a den of lions with no one to protect them. He thinks of the crown that was placed on his head just days ago, heavy with the weight of 20,000 souls who look to him for leadership. "Jaime Lannister," he says formally, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "You stand accused of the attempted murder of Brandon Stark of Winterfell. You have confessed to this crime before witnesses. As king in the north, I sentence you to die." Ice rises above his head, the steel catching the morning light. For a moment, the great sword seems to burn like a star against the grey sky. "Any last words?" Robb asks. Jaime looks up at him, and for the first time since his capture, something like respect flickers in those green eyes. "Just one question, Your Grace. When they bring you your father's head, when they parade your sisters through the streets in chains, when Tywin Lannister burns the North to ashes, will you still believe justice was worth the price? The sword falls like judgment itself. Valyrian steel meets flesh and bone with barely a whisper of resistance. Jaime Lannister's head rolls away from his body, coming to rest against the roots of an ancient oak tree. His golden hair catches the light one last time before the blood begins to pool beneath the fallen leaves. The silence that follows is absolute. No bird sings. No wind stirs the branches. The very forest seems to hold its breath, as if recognizing that something fundamental has changed in this moment. The boy who drew the sword is gone. In his place stands a king who understands that justice sometimes requires terrible choices. Lord Karstark nods his approval. "It is done, Your Grace. The child killer has paid for his crimes." The Blackfish cleans his own blade methodically, his weathered face unreadable. "Aye, it's done. Now we deal with the consequences." Theon stares at the headless body, and when he looks at Robb again, there's something new in his expression. Not fear exactly, but a recognition that his foster brother has crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Robb sheathes ice, the blade sliding home with a soft click. Around him, his bannermen await orders, await guidance from their young king who has just taken his first step down a darker path. "Send ravens," he says quietly, "to River Run, to the Eyrie, to White Harbour. Tell them what has happened here. Tell them that the North remembers its own, and the North answers injustice with justice." He pauses, looking down at Jaime's still form one last time. "And send a raven to Casterly Rock," he adds. "Tell Lord Tywin that his heir is dead. Tell him why. And tell him that if he wants vengeance for this day, he'll find the wolves of Winterfell ready to give him all the war he desires." The morning mist begins to lift, revealing the full scope of their victory. Hundreds of Lannister soldiers lie dead or captured among the trees. Their golden banners lie trampled in the earth. But as Robb Stark walks away from Jaime Lannister's corpse, he knows the true war is only beginning. Behind him, the Kingslayer's blood seeps into the soil of the Whispering Wood, watering the ground where kings are made and legends are born. The die is cast. There can be no turning back now. The raven arrives at the Red Keep as the sun reaches its zenith over King's Landing. The blackbird perches on the window sill of the rookery, its dark eyes reflecting the light that streams through the narrow windows. In its leg pouch rests a message that will change the course of the Seven Kingdoms forever. Grand Maester Pycelle receives the raven with shaking hands. His ancient fingers fumble with the leather binding as he unfurls the parchment, his rheumy eyes scanning the words written in the bold script of a northern Maester. The message is brief, clinical in its simplicity, but its meaning hits him like a physical blow. The old Maester's face goes white as fresh snow. He reads the message again, hoping his failing eyes have deceived him, praying that age has finally addled his wits beyond repair. But the words remain unchanged, stark and terrible in their finality. Jaime Lannister is dead, executed by Robb Stark for the attempted murder of Brandon Stark. Justice, the Northern King calls it, justice for crimes confessed and witnessed. Pycelle's hands tremble as he rolls the parchment. He knows what this news will do to Queen Cersei. He knows the fury that will follow, the blood that will flow, the chaos that will consume them all. For a moment, he considers burning the message, pretending it never arrived. But ravens fly to many roosts, and this news will reach the capital through other channels soon enough. Better that the Queen Regent hear it from him first. Cersei sits in her solar in Megor's Holdfast, staring out at the city that sprawls beneath the Red Keep like a great beast. The morning has been filled with the tedious business of ruling, hearing petitions from minor lords, reviewing the royal household's expenses, enduring another of Joffrey's increasingly violent tantrums. The crown weighs heavily on her son's head, and the weight seems to be driving him toward ever greater acts of cruelty. She turns when Pycelle enters, noting immediately the pallor of his face, the tremor in his step. The Grand Maester carries himself like a man bearing news of a plague, and something cold settles in Cersei's chest. "Your Grace," Pycelle begins, his voice barely above a whisper. "I bring word from the north, from Riverrun." Cersei's green eyes narrow. News from Riverrun can only mean news of the war, and the war has brought nothing but frustration so far. Jaime's forces were supposed to crush the northern rebellion quickly, decisively. Instead, reports have been scarce and contradictory. "Speak," she commands, rising from her chair. "What news of my brother's campaign?" Pycelle's throat works soundlessly for a moment. Then, with the air of a man stepping off a cliff, he extends the parchment toward her. "Your Grace, I regret to inform you that Sir Jaime has fallen in battle against the rebel forces." The words hang in the air between them, like a blade suspended over Cersei's heart. For a long moment, she doesn't move, doesn't breathe, doesn't think. The parchment wavers in Pycelle's outstretched hand, but she makes no move to take it. "Fallen," she repeats, and her voice sounds strange in her own ears, distant and hollow. "What do you mean, fallen?" Pycelle swallows hard. "Your Grace, the message states that Sir Jaime was captured during a battle in the Whispering Wood. He was subsequently executed by order of the king in the north." The solar explodes into motion as Cersei's composure shatters like glass striking stone. She sweeps across the room in 3 quick strides, snatching the parchment from Pycelle's hands and scanning its contents with desperate eyes. The words blur together, but their meaning remains clear and terrible. "No!" The word emerges as barely a whisper. "No, this is wrong. This is a lie. Jaime doesn't lose battles. Jaime doesn't get captured. Jaime doesn't—" Her voice breaks on the last word, and the parchment falls from nerveless fingers to flutter toward the floor like a dying bird. The silence stretches between them, heavy with grief and growing rage. Pycelle watches his queen with fearful eyes, recognizing the signs of a storm about to break. In the distance, the bells of the great sept of Baelor toll the hour, their bronze voices echoing across the city like funeral dirges. Then Cersei screams. The sound that tears from her throat is primal, wordless, filled with such anguish and fury that Pycelle stumbles backward against the door. It's the cry of a lioness whose cubs have been slaughtered, the wail of a woman whose world has just collapsed into ash and ruin. She turns on the solar like a whirlwind of destruction. Her hands sweep books from shelves, sending leather-bound volumes cascading to the floor. She overturns tables, shatters wine goblets against the stone walls, tears tapestries from their hangings with her bare hands. A priceless Myrish mirror explodes into 1,000 glittering fragments as she hurls it across the room. "Murdered!" she shrieks, her voice echoing off the walls. "They murdered him! Those northern savages murdered my brother!" Pycelle presses himself against the door, too terrified to flee, too horrified to look away. He has served in the Red Keep for decades, has witnessed the madness of kings and the fury of queens, but he has never seen anything like this raw, animalistic grief. The door behind him crashes open, sending the old maester stumbling forward. Tyrion Lannister enters the solar, his mismatched eyes taking in the destruction with a single sweeping glance. Behind him come several Lannister guardsmen, their hands on their sword hilts, ready for battle against an enemy they cannot fight. "Sister," Tyrion says carefully, his voice cutting through Cersei's anguished cries. "I heard the commotion. What has happened?" Cersei spins toward him, her golden hair wild about her face, her green eyes blazing with madness and grief. When she sees her dwarf brother, something like recognition flickers in her gaze, followed immediately by a rage so pure it takes Tyrion's breath away. "You!" she hisses, advancing on him with her hands curved like claws. "You did this! You let this happen!" Tyrion stands his ground, though every instinct screams at him to flee. "Sister, I don't know what you're talking about. Let what happen?" "Jaime is dead." The words explode from her lips like a physical blow. "The northern bastards captured him and cut off his head, and where were you? Where were you when your brother needed you?" The accusation hits Tyrion like a hammer to the chest. He staggers back a step, his face going pale beneath his mismatched beard. Jaime dead? It seems impossible, inconceivable. Jaime the Golden, Jaime the Skilled, Jaime who had never lost a battle or failed to smile in the face of danger. "How?" he whispers, and the single word carries the weight of 1,000 questions. Cersei's laugh is bitter and broken. "How?" The same way everything happens in this cursed world, through treachery and betrayal and the failure of those who were supposed to protect him. She advances on Tyrion again, her face twisted with grief and accusation. "You should have been there. You should have been with him, watching his back, keeping him safe. But no, you were here, playing your little games, pursuing your little pleasures, while our brother died alone in some northern forest." "Cersei," Tyrion begins, but she cuts him off with a gesture so sharp it might have been a blade. Don't speak his name. Don't pretend you cared about him when you've spent your whole life disappointing him, disappointing all of us." The words sting, but Tyrion recognizes them for what they are, the lashing out of a woman consumed by grief. He has lost Jaime too, the only family member who ever showed him genuine affection, and the pain of it threatens to buckle his knees. "What do we know?" he asks instead, forcing his voice to remain steady. "What exactly happened?" Pycelle steps forward hesitantly, still clutching fragments of the torn message. My lord, the raven came from Riverrun. It states that Ser Jaime was captured during a battle in the Whispering Wood. The king in the north executed him for crimes against House Stark. Crimes? Cersei's voice rises to a shriek again. What crimes? Fighting in a war, defending his family, serving his king. Tyrion's quick mind pieces together the implications. The Whispering Wood, Riverrun, Robb Stark claiming justice for crimes against his house. Only one event could provoke such extreme action. Bran Stark, he says quietly, and the words fall into the solar like stones into still water. Cersei's eyes snap to his face, and in them he sees confirmation of his fears. She knows. She has always known what happened in that tower at Winterfell, has always known why the boy fell, has always known that Jaime... He confessed, Tyrion continues, his voice growing stronger as understanding dawns. Jaime confessed to pushing Bran Stark from the tower, and young Robb decided that was worth a death sentence. He saved us, Cersei screams, her composure dissolving entirely. He saved our children. He saved our lives. That little boy saw what he shouldn't have seen, and Jaime did what he had to do to protect us. And now he's dead because of it. Dead because he was loyal. Dead because he loved us more than his own life. The grief in her voice is terrible to hear, raw and primal and utterly destructive. Tyrion watches his sister with something approaching pity, recognizing that she is past reason, past logic, past any hope of rational thought. We need to call the small council, he says carefully. We need to decide how to respond to this. I know how to respond, Cersei cuts him off, her voice suddenly cold and deadly calm. We kill them all, every last northern savage, every Riverlands rebel, every person who stood by and watched while they murdered my brother. She turns toward the door, her movements sharp and predatory. Summon the council. Summon my son. Summon everyone who still has the spine to call themselves a Lannister ally. Tyrion watches her go, recognizing the dangerous shift in her demeanor. The grief remains, but it has crystallized into something harder and more terrible, a thirst for vengeance that will not be easily satisfied. Within the hour, the small council convenes in the throne room. Joffrey sits the Iron Throne like a child, playing at being king, his golden crown slightly askew on his pale head. The twisted metal of Aegon's seat seems to dwarf him, making him appear even younger than his 13 years. Cersei stands at the base of the throne, her grief hidden behind a mask of cold fury. Around the room, the most powerful people in the Seven Kingdoms wait to hear how the realm will respond to this unprecedented act of rebellion. My lords, Cersei begins, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. We are gathered here to discuss a crime so heinous, so beyond the bounds of civilized warfare, that it demands immediate and terrible response. Lord Peter Baelish steps forward from his position near the throne. Littlefinger's pale eyes glitter with something that might be excitement, as if he scents opportunity in the chaos that's descending on the realm. Your Grace speaks of the execution of Ser Jaime, he says smoothly. A tragic loss indeed, and one that changes the nature of this conflict significantly. Changes it? Cersei's voice rises dangerously. Changes it? They murdered the heir to Casterly Rock. They murdered the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. They murdered my brother in cold blood after accepting his surrender. This isn't war anymore, Lord Baelish. This is butchery. Grand Maester Pycelle clears his throat nervously. Your Grace, perhaps we should consider the implications more carefully. With King Robert dead and Ser Jaime fallen, The realm's stability. The realm's stability? Joffrey's voice cracks as he interrupts, his pale eyes lighting up with vicious pleasure. The realm will be perfectly stable once we kill every last rebel and mount their heads on spikes, starting with Ned Stark. Cersei turns toward her son, and for a moment, Tyrion sees something like satisfaction flicker across her features. The boy's bloodthirst matches her own perfectly. The Stark patriarch still sits in the black cells, she says, her voice taking on a tone of deadly certainty. I had planned to use him as leverage, to trade his life for concessions from his son. But that was before they murdered Jaime, before they showed us their true nature. She pauses, letting her words sink in, letting the assembled lords understand the gravity of what she's proposing. Execute Ned Stark, she continues, her voice growing stronger with each word. Execute him publicly, brutally, and let his son know that this is the price of murdering Lannisters. Let the whole realm know that such crimes will not go unpunished. A murmur runs through the assembled courtiers. Even in a realm grown accustomed to violence and political executions, the summary killing of a Lord Paramount represents a significant escalation. Lord Varys steps forward, his soft hands folded before him, his expression troubled. Your Grace, executing Lord Stark would eliminate any possibility of negotiated peace. It would make this conflict absolute, total. Is that truly our desired course? Peace, Cersei laughs, and the sound is sharp and bitter. They want peace. Then they can find it in the grave beside my brother. There will be no negotiations, no compromises, no mercy for the murderers of Jaime Lannister. Tyrion watches the proceedings with growing alarm. His sister's grief has transformed into something monstrous, a desire for vengeance that threatens to consume not just her enemies, but the entire realm. Your Grace, he says carefully, perhaps we should consider Lord Tywin's counsel before taking such drastic action. Father will want blood, Cersei cuts him off. Father will want the North burned to ash and its rebels fed to the flames, and I intend to give him that satisfaction. She turns back toward the throne, where Joffrey sits with barely contained excitement. The boy king's fingers drum against the armrests of the Iron Throne, and his pale eyes shine with anticipation of the violence to come. My son, Cersei says formally, I request your royal command to execute the traitor, Ned Stark. Let his death be the first payment on the debt these rebels owe us for murdering your uncle. Joffrey's smile is bright and terrible. Granted, mother. Gladly granted. Have them bring the traitor to the steps of the Great Sept. Let him die before the gods and the people, and let everyone see what happens to those who defy the crown. Littlefinger steps forward again, his expression carefully neutral. Your Grace, if I may suggest, such a public execution would serve as an excellent demonstration of royal power. The people need to see strength in these uncertain times. Tyrion recognizes the subtle manipulation in Baelish's words, the way he phrases encouragement as practical advice. The man is pouring oil on flames that are already threatening to consume everything in their path. It's decided then, Cersei says with finality. Send word to the High Septon. Send word to the City Watch. Tomorrow morning, Ned Stark dies for the crimes of his murdering son. She pauses, scanning the assembled faces with cold satisfaction. And send ravens to every lord in the 7 kingdoms. Let them know that the crown remembers its friends and punishes its enemies. Let them know that the price of rebellion has just become higher than they ever imagined. As the small council disperses, Tyrion lingers near the throne, watching his sister with troubled eyes. He can see the path she's chosen, can trace its inevitable course toward greater and greater violence. The execution of Ned Stark will bring no peace, no resolution, only escalation and more death. But Cersei is beyond reason now, consumed by grief and rage, and the terrible certainty that only blood can wash away blood. She has chosen war, absolute and total, and the Seven Kingdoms will burn for her choice. In the distance, the bells of King's Landing toll the evening hour, their bronze voices echoing across a city that has no idea how much its world is about to change. Tomorrow will bring death and rage, and the first steps down a path from which there can be no return. The lioness has lost her mate, and her roar will shake the very foundations of the realm. The sun sets over the Lannister camp, like a wound bleeding across the western sky. Lord Tywin Lannister sits in his command tent, studying maps of the Riverlands by the light of oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across the canvas walls. Around him, the sounds of an army at rest filter through the evening air. The clatter of cooking pots, the murmur of soldiers sharing tales around their fires, the distant whinny of destriers in the horse lines. It is the ordered chaos of a force that has known nothing but victory, an army that follows the most feared commander in the Seven Kingdoms. But tonight, that certainty is about to shatter. The first raven arrives as Tywin reviews supply manifests with his quartermaster. The blackbird settles on the perch outside his tent with unusual agitation, its cries cutting through the evening quiet like blades. Tywin dismisses the quartermaster with a wave of his hand, already sensing that whatever news the raven carries will require his full attention. His fingers work the leather binding with practiced efficiency, unrolling the small parchment with the fluid motions of a man who has received 10,000 such messages over the course of his long career. But as his pale green eyes scan the words written in a master's careful script, his hands grow very still. The parchment contains only a few lines, but they might as well be a sword thrust to his heart. Jaime captured, executed by order of Robb Stark, justice for crimes against House Stark. The northern rebels send their greetings to the Lion of Casterly Rock. Tywin reads the message 3 times before setting it carefully on his campaign table. His face reveals nothing, shows no emotion beyond mild interest, as if he has just received a routine report about grain shipments or troop movements. But those who know him well would recognize the danger in his stillness, the way his jaw tightens almost imperceptibly, the subtle whitening of his knuckles as his hands rest flat against the wooden surface. A second raven arrives within minutes of the first, then a third. Each message confirms what the first revealed, adding details that paint an increasingly clear picture of what transpired in the Whispering Wood. Jaime's forces scattered, his capture during the rout, his confession to pushing Bran Stark from the tower, his execution by Ned Stark's great sword, Ice. The fourth raven brings word from King's Landing, from Cersei herself. Her grief bleeds through every line of the message, her rage and thirst for vengeance clear even in the formal language of royal correspondence. She has ordered Ned Stark's execution. She demands immediate and total war against the northern rebels. She calls for the complete destruction of House Stark and all who follow their banners. Tywin sets this final message atop the others, creating a neat stack of parchment that represents the death of his firstborn son and the fundamental transformation of this war. For a long moment, he simply stares at the stack, his mind working through implications and possibilities with the cold precision that has made him the most successful military commander of his generation. Then he stands, moves to the tent flap, and calls for his brother. "Kevan, come." Sir Kevan Lannister enters the tent within moments. his weathered face bearing the marks of a lifetime spent in his older brother's shadow. He carries himself with the quiet competence of a man who has never sought glory for himself, but has served as the steady foundation upon which others build their legends. "Brother," Kevin begins, but Tywin cuts him off with a gesture toward the stack of messages. "Read," Tywin says simply. Kevin's eyes scan the parchments quickly, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finishes, he sets them down carefully and meets his brother's gaze. "Jaime," he says, and the single word carries the weight of 1,000 questions and accusations. "Dead," Tywin confirms, his voice as level as if he were discussing the weather. "Executed by a boy playing at being king, murdered for doing what any man would do to protect his family." Kevin studies his brother's face, searching for some sign of the grief that must be tearing at him beneath that controlled exterior. But Tywin Lannister reveals nothing, gives no hint of the rage and sorrow that burn in his chest like molten gold. "What are your orders?" Kevin asks finally, recognizing that his brother has already moved past grief and into the realm of action and consequence. "Summon the War Council," Tywin says, turning back to his maps, all of them. "Sir Adam, Sir Amory, Sir Gregor, every banner lord in the camp. We have planning to do." Kevin hesitates at the tent flap. "Brother, I'm sorry. Jaime was my son," Tywin interrupts, his voice still perfectly controlled. "My heir, the future of House Lannister. And now he's dead, cut down by northern savages who mistake brutality for justice." He turns to face Kevin directly, and for just a moment, something terrible flickers in his pale green eyes. "But grief is a luxury I cannot afford tonight. Tonight, we plan how to make them pay for what they've taken from us." Within the hour, Tywin's War Council assembles in the command tent. The space fills with the most powerful men in the Westerlands, bannermen who have followed the Lannister banners for generations, knights whose loyalty to Casterly Rock runs deeper than blood, commanders whose skill in war has been proven across a dozen battlefields. Sir Adam Marbrand arrives first, his silver beard neatly trimmed, his bearing that of a man who has never known defeat. Behind him comes Sir Amory Lorch, scarred and brutal, a man who understands that war is ultimately about breaking the enemy's will to resist. Sir Gregor Clegane fills the tent entrance like a mountain of muscle and steel, the mountain's presence dominating the space simply by existing. The lesser lords file in behind them, Lord Lefford, Lord Liddon, Sir Davin Lannister, and a dozen others whose combined armies represent the military might of the wealthiest kingdom in Westeros. These are men who have prospered under Tywin's leadership, who owe their positions and their power to his strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency. Tywin waits until they are all assembled before speaking. He stands behind his campaign table, his hands resting lightly on its surface, his pale eyes scanning the faces before him with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Gentlemen," he begins, his voice carrying easily through the tent, despite its measured tone. "I have called you here tonight to discuss a change in the nature of our conflict with the northern rebels." He gestures toward the stack of messages without looking at them. "Today, Robb Stark demonstrated that this war is no longer about political differences or questions of succession. Today he showed us that this is a war of extermination." A murmur runs through the assembled commanders, but Tywin continues before anyone can speak. "My son, Sir Jaime, was captured during a battle near River Run. He was subsequently executed by direct order of the self-proclaimed king in the north. Not held for ransom, not imprisoned as a political hostage, executed, murdered in cold blood." The silence that follows his words is absolute, Every man in the tent understands the implications of what he's describing. The execution of a high-ranking prisoner, particularly one of Jaime's stature, represents a fundamental break with the traditional rules of warfare among the great houses. Sir Adam Marbrand leans forward, his weathered face creased with concern. My lord, what of negotiations? Surely there must be some way to... Negotiations? Tywin's voice remains level, but there's something in his tone that makes every man in the tent straighten. They murdered my heir. They murdered the Lord Commander of the King's Guard. They murdered him for crimes he committed to protect his family. What exactly would you have me negotiate? He moves around the table, pacing slowly as he speaks, his movements precise and controlled. The northern rebels have shown us their true nature. They are not honorable enemies, seeking political redress. They are savages who kill prisoners and call it justice. They have declared total war upon House Lannister, and we will give them exactly what they have asked for. Lord Lefford shifts uncomfortably in his seat. My lord, the cost of such a campaign will be whatever it needs to be. Tywin cuts him off. Gold can be replaced, armies can be rebuilt, but honor, once lost, can never be recovered. The reputation of House Lannister, once tarnished, can never be fully restored. He stops pacing and fixes his gaze on the assembled lords. For 40 years, I have built the Lannister name into the most feared and respected in the Seven Kingdoms. I have made our enemies tremble at the mere mention of Casterly Rock. I have shown the realm what happens to those who cross the lions of the West. His voice grows harder, colder, carrying a promise of violence that makes even seasoned warriors uncomfortable. Robb Stark thinks he can murder my son and face no consequences. He thinks he can hide behind his walls in the north and wait for this war to blow over. He thinks wrong. Tywin turns back to the maps spread across his table, his pale green eyes tracing the roads and rivers of the Riverlands with the intensity of a predator planning a hunt. We will burn every village between here and Winterfell, he says matter-of-factly. We will destroy every castle that has declared for the Stark pretender. We will kill every man who has taken up arms against the crown, and we will make their wives and children watch. Sir Gregor Clegane's massive frame shifts with what might be anticipation. The mountain has always been Tywin's instrument for the work too dirty even for other sellswords, and the promise of unlimited brutality clearly appeals to his nature. But my lord, Kevan interjects carefully, such tactics might drive more houses to the rebel cause. Fear can breed desperation, and desperate men. Desperate men die, Tywin interrupts. Desperate men break. Desperate men surrender when they realize that resistance brings only death and destruction. He traces a finger along the map, following the course of the trident toward the neck. The north has one great weakness. It can only be supplied through the neck or by sea. Cut off those supply lines, destroy every settlement that might provide food or shelter to northern forces, and winter will do the rest. The strategic brilliance of the plan becomes clear to the assembled commanders. The North's strength lies in its defensible geography and its people's familiarity with harsh conditions. But even northerners need food, need shelter, need the basic supplies that support any military campaign. You propose to starve them out, Sir Adam says slowly. Cut their supply lines and let winter finish what we start. I propose to teach them the cost of murdering Lannisters, Tywin corrects. The starvation is merely the most efficient method of instruction. Lord Liddon raises a cautious hand. My lord, what of the Riverlands? Many of these lands belong to houses that have declared neutrality, or even support for the crown. Tywin's smile is thin and cold. The Riverlands have harbored rebels and provided aid to my son's murderers. They will learn to choose their allies more carefully in future. He turns away from the map and faces his war council directly, his pale green eyes reflecting the lamplight like chips of ice. Effective immediately, we implement a new strategy. Total war. No quarter for enemy forces. No mercy for rebel sympathizers. No distinction between combatants and those who support them. The commanders exchange glances, recognizing the magnitude of what their lord is proposing. This goes beyond the traditional bounds of warfare among the great houses, beyond the rules that have governed conflicts in Westeros for generations. My lord, Kevin says carefully, such tactics will be remembered. They will define how history judges our house. History is written by the victors, Tywin replies, and we will be victorious. When this war is over, when the Stark line is extinguished, and their supporters have been scattered to the winds, no one will remember our methods. They will only remember our success. He moves to a small table near the tent's entrance, where a decanter of wine sits beside several cups. His movements are steady, controlled, betraying no hint of the emotional turmoil that must be raging beneath his composed exterior. "Send ravens," he orders as he pours himself a small measure of Dornish red. "To every ally, every potential supporter, every house that has remained neutral in this conflict. Tell them that the terms have changed. Tell them that those who stand with House Lannister will be richly rewarded, and those who oppose us will be utterly destroyed." Sir Amory Lorch leans forward, his scarred face eager. "What of the northern prisoners we've taken? The men captured in the recent skirmishes?" Tywin sips his wine thoughtfully before answering. "Execute them, all of them. Let word spread that we no longer take prisoners from armies that murder captives. Let them know that this is the new reality they have created." The order sends a chill through the tent. Even among hardened warriors accustomed to the brutality of war, the summary execution of prisoners represents a significant escalation. "My lord," Lord Lefford ventures, "perhaps we should consider—" "I have considered everything," Tywin cuts him off, his voice carrying a finality that brooks no argument. "The decision is made. The orders are given. You will implement them without question or hesitation." He sets down his wine cup and returns to the map table, his pale green eyes tracing the borders between the Westerlands and the Riverlands. "Sir Gregor, you will take 3,000 men and begin the pacification of the Eastern Riverlands. Burn every village that has declared for Stark. Kill every man of fighting age. Leave the women and children alive so they can spread word of what befalls those who support rebellion." The mountain's smile is terrible to behold. "It will be done, my lord." "Sir Amory, you will do the same in the western reaches. Lord Lefford, your men will secure the Golden Tooth and ensure no northern force can threaten our homeland while we deal with this rebellion." The orders continue, each one precisely calculated to maximize terror and minimize the enemy's ability to resist. Tywin Lannister has transformed from a political leader seeking to quell a rebellion into something far more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose and the military power to reshape the Seven Kingdoms through blood and fire. As the War Council disperses, carrying their lord's brutal orders to armies eager for vengeance, Tywin remains alone in his tent. The maps spread before him show roads and castles and rivers, but he sees something else entirely, a path of destruction that will stretch from the Trident to the Wall, a campaign of terror that will serve as eternal reminder of the price of crossing House Lannister. For the first time since receiving word of Jaime's death, Tywin allows his composed mask to slip slightly. His shoulders sag almost imperceptibly, and his pale green eyes show something that might be grief or rage or the terrible certainty of what he's about to unleash upon the realm. "You took my son," he whispers to the empty tent, his voice carrying all the pain he refuses to show his subordinates. "You took my heir, my legacy, my future. Now you will learn what it means to make an enemy of Tywin Lannister." He reaches for the stack of messages again, reading once more the words that describe his son's death. Then, with deliberate precision, he feeds each parchment to the flame of an oil lamp, watching as the news of Jaime's execution turns to ash and smoke. Outside, the Lannister camp continues its preparations for war, unaware that their lord has just crossed a line from which there can be no return. The lions of Casterly Rock are about to show the Seven Kingdoms what true savagery looks like, and the realm will burn for the lesson. Tomorrow will bring fire and blood to the Riverlands. Tomorrow will begin the campaign that transforms the War of the Five Kings into something far more terrible, a war of extermination that will consume everything in its path until only one house remains standing among the ashes of their enemies. The Lion of Casterly Rock has awakened, and his roar will shake the very foundations of Westeros. The bells of King's Landing toll across the city like the voice of doom itself. From the great sept of Baelor to the smallest neighborhood sanctuaries, bronze and iron ring out the call for citizens to witness royal justice. The morning air carries their sound across the capital's 7 hills, reaching every district from the prosperous heights where the nobility dwell to the squalid depths of Flea Bottom, where the small folk struggle for survival. On the steps of the great sept of Baelor, a crowd gathers unlike any seen since Robert Baratheon's coronation. Merchants close their shops early, craftsmen abandon their workshops, and even the most hardened criminals pause in their pursuits to witness what promises to be a moment that will echo through the histories of the Seven Kingdoms. At the center of it all stands a simple wooden block, its surface stained dark with the blood of previous executions. Beside it waits Sir Ilyn Payne, the king's justice, his pale eyes reflecting nothing as he tests the edge of his executioner's blade. The sword is not ice. That great Valyrian steel weapon remains in the north with Robb Stark. Instead, Payne carries common castle-forged steel, sharp enough for its grim purpose, but lacking the legendary sharpness of the Stark ancestral blade. The crowd murmurs and shifts as the great doors of the sept open. From within emerges a procession that marks the end of an era. First come the gold cloaks of the City Watch, their spears gleaming in the morning sun as they form a corridor through the masses. Behind them march the Kingsguard in their white cloaks and gleaming armor, though their ranks are diminished by Jaime's death and the chaos that has consumed the capital. Then comes the prisoner. Ned Stark walks between his guards with his head held high, his dark hair showing strands of premature grey that speak to the weight he has carried as Lord of Winterfell and Hand of the King. His simple grey clothing marks him as a man who never sought the trappings of power, who served duty rather than ambition. But his brown eyes, fixed straight ahead as he approaches the block, burn with the quiet dignity of a man who regrets nothing he has done in service to honor and truth. Behind the prisoner comes the royal party. King Joffrey sits a golden palanquin carried by 8 strong men, his pale face bright with excitement at the spectacle he is about to witness. The crown of the Baratheon kings sits slightly askew on his golden head, as if the weight of kingship is still too much for his young shoulders to bear properly. Beside the palanquin walks Queen Regent Cersei, her own golden hair catching the morning light like spun metal. Her green eyes scan the crowd with the alertness of a predator, watching for any sign of unrest or dissent. The grief that consumed her yesterday has crystallized into something harder and more dangerous. A thirst for vengeance that demands blood to wash away the pain of Jaime's death. In the crowd, hidden among the press of bodies and common faces, Arya Stark watches in horror as her father approaches his doom. The girl has spent days searching for some way to rescue him, some path that might lead to his freedom. But now, seeing the inexorable machinery of royal justice grinding toward its conclusion, she realizes that all her desperate plans and childish hopes have been for nothing. Her small hands clench into fists at her sides. The dancing master's lessons echo in her mind. Balance, speed, the water dance that can make a small opponent dangerous against larger foes. But what use are such skills against an entire kingdom? What can one girl do against the combined might of the Iron Throne? High above the crowd, at a window of the Red Keep, Sansa Stark stands frozen in horrified disbelief. She has been commanded to watch, ordered by Queen Cersei to witness what happens to traitors and their families. The girl who once dreamed of marrying Prince Joffrey and living happily in the capital now sees the brutal reality behind the songs and stories she once loved. Tears stream down her face as she recognizes the truth she has been too innocent to understand. There will be no rescue, no last-minute reprieve, no noble knight arriving to save her father's life. This is not a song. This is the real world, where good men die and evil triumphs, where honor becomes a weapon that enemies use against those foolish enough to possess it. Joffrey rises from his palanquin, his young voice carrying clearly across the packed square as he addresses his subjects. "People of King's Landing," he calls out, his tone mixing royal authority with the excitement of a boy about to watch his first execution. "You are gathered here to witness the justice of the crown. Ned Stark, former hand of the king, stands accused of treason against the realm. He has confessed his crimes and thrown himself upon the mercy of the crown." The crowd stirs at these words, though mercy seems far from anyone's mind this morning. The king's speech continues, but many in the audience pay more attention to the prisoner himself, to the way he carries himself with quiet dignity, even in the face of death. "However," Joffrey continues, his voice rising with barely contained glee, "recent events have proven that mercy is a luxury the crown can no longer afford. The rebels who follow this traitor's son have shown their true nature by murdering prisoners of war. They have executed Sir Jaime Lannister, a knight of the King's Guard, in violation of every law of gods and men." A gasp runs through the crowd at this news. Many had heard rumors of troubles in the Riverlands, but the death of the famous Kingslayer comes as a shock that ripples through the gathered masses like a physical blow. "Therefore," Joffrey concludes, his young face bright with malicious pleasure, "I, Joffrey of the House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, do sentence you to die." Ned Stark shows no reaction to the pronouncement of his doom. He has known since entering the Black Cells that this moment was inevitable, has spent his imprisonment preparing himself for the end with the quiet faith of a man who has always tried to do what he believed to be right. As the guards force him to his knees before the block, Ned's eyes scan the crowd one final time. He cannot see Arya in the press of bodies, cannot know that his youngest daughter witnesses his final moments. But perhaps some instinct tells him she is there, for his voice carries clearly across the square as he speaks his final words. "I am Eddard of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. I lived for duty, for honor, and for the protection of the innocent. I die for speaking truth to power, for refusing to call bastards legitimate, for standing against those who would corrupt the realm for their own gain. He pauses, his brown eyes finding the window where Sansa watches in anguished silence. I regret nothing I have done in service to the realm and to my family. May the gods judge me fairly, and may they protect those I leave behind. The crowd falls silent as Ser Ilyn Payne steps forward, his blade catching the morning light. There is something almost ritualistic about the moment, as if the entire city holds its breath in recognition of the gravity of what is about to occur. Then, the sword falls. The silence that follows is absolute, broken only by the distant cry of seagulls over Blackwater Bay and the soft weeping of those in the crowd who knew the man who has just died. Ned Stark's head rolls away from the block, his brown eyes staring sightlessly at the sky he will never see again. Arya screams. The sound that tears from her throat is pure anguish, the cry of a child watching her world collapse into nightmare. Those standing near her in the crowd turn to stare, but the girl is already moving, pushing through the press of bodies with desperate fury, her small hands striking out at anyone who tries to stop her. But where can she go? What can she do? Her father is dead, her sister is trapped, and she is alone in a city that has just proven it has no mercy for the family of Ned Stark. High in her window, Sansa collapses to her knees, her body racked with sobs that echo through the empty chamber. The fairy tale of her life in King's Landing dies with her father, leaving behind only the harsh reality of a hostage whose value has just increased immeasurably. The news travels with the speed that only catastrophe can achieve. Ravens fly from King's Landing to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, carrying word of Ned Stark's execution and the king's justification for the deed. By evening, the great houses of Westeros know that the War of the Five Kings has entered a new and bloodier phase. At River Run, Robb Stark receives the news while reviewing plans for his next campaign against the Lannister forces. The young king reads the message 3 times before setting it aside, his face pale with shock and growing fury. "My lord," asks the Blackfish, noting his great-nephew's distress, "what word from the capital?" "They killed him," Robb says quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "They killed my father." The command tent falls silent as the implications sink in. Every lord, every knight, every advisor recognizes the moment for what it is, the point where all hope of negotiated peace dies, where the war transforms from political rebellion into something far more personal and destructive. Lord Karstark is the first to speak, his weathered face twisted with grim satisfaction. "Good. Now you see them for what they truly are, Your Grace. Now you understand that there can be no mercy for such monsters." But Robb barely hears him. In his mind, he can see the chain of events that led to this moment as clearly as if he were watching it unfold before his eyes. Jaime's execution in the Whispering Wood, Cersei's grief and rage, the order for his father's death, given in retaliation for his own decision to choose justice over mercy. "This is my fault," he whispers, and the words hit him like physical blows. "I killed Jaime, and they killed father in response. I chose vengeance, and it cost me the most important person in my life." The Blackfish steps forward, his voice gentle but firm. "No, nephew. You chose justice. What they did in response shows their true nature, not the wrongness of your choice." "Does it matter?" Robb asks, looking up at his advisor with eyes full of anguish and growing rage. "Does it matter whether I was right or wrong? My father is dead because of what I did. My sisters are trapped in King's Landing with the people who murdered him. My mother has lost her husband because I couldn't show mercy to his killer. The silence that follows is heavy with grief and the weight of decisions that cannot be undone. Every man in the tent recognizes that they are witnessing the transformation of their young king from idealistic boy into something harder and more dangerous. "What are your orders, Your Grace?" Lord Karstark asks finally. Robb stands slowly, his hand moving to the pommel of his sword. When he speaks, his voice carries a new quality, not the uncertain tones of a boy playing at being king, but the cold authority of a man who has lost everything and has nothing left to lose. "No quarter," he says simply. "No prisoners. No mercy for any who serve the usurper's cause. They want to make this a war of extermination? So be it. We'll show them what northern justice truly looks like." At Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon receives word of Ned Stark's execution with the grim satisfaction of a man whose worst predictions have been proven correct. The stern lord stands in his chamber overlooking the narrow sea, his jaw set in lines of iron determination as he contemplates the news from King's Landing. "Fools," he says to his adviser, Davos Seaworth. "They had the perfect hostage, and they threw him away for the sake of petty vengeance." Davos nods, understanding his lord's reasoning immediately. "Aye, my lord. Alive, Ned Stark was worth an army. Dead, he's worth nothing but more hatred and bloodshed." "Exactly." Stannis turns from the window, his pale blue eyes bright with calculation. "Joffrey has just proven himself unfit for the throne in the most public way possible. He executed the most honorable man in the 7 kingdoms for speaking the truth about his bastard birth." The one-time smuggler strokes his greying beard thoughtfully. "What does this mean for our plans, my lord?" "It means the gods have handed us a gift," Stannis replies, moving to his desk where papers and maps detail his preparations for pressing his own claim to the Iron Throne. Every house that valued honor and justice will remember this day. Every lord who ever respected Ned Stark will think twice about supporting the boy who ordered his death. He begins drafting a new letter, his pen moving across the parchment with decisive strokes. Send ravens to every great house. Remind them of what they've just witnessed. Ask them whether they want to serve a king who executes prisoners for spite, or whether they prefer to follow the rightful heir to Robert's throne. Far to the south, in the gardens of Highgarden, Renly Baratheon receives similar news, with very different calculations running through his mind. The youngest Baratheon brother has always been a man who understands the importance of appearances, of being seen as the kind of king people want to follow rather than fear. This changes everything, he tells Sir Loras Tyrell, as they walk among the roses that have made Highgarden famous throughout the 7 kingdoms. "Joffrey has just handed me the perfect weapon to use against his legitimacy." The Knight of Flowers nods, his handsome face creased with concern. "The lords will remember this, my lord. No one will feel safe making bargains with a king who executes hostages." "Exactly. And who do they turn to when they need an alternative?" Renly's smile is bright and confident. "They turn to the brother who offers mercy instead of vengeance, who promises justice instead of spite." He pauses beside a particularly beautiful rosebush, its red blooms catching the afternoon sunlight like drops of blood. "Send word to my supporters. Tell them that the time has come to offer the realm a true choice. Tell them that Renly Baratheon offers everything that Joffrey Baratheon lacks: honor, mercy, and the wisdom to know when to stay his hand." Across the narrow sea, in the tent she shares with her small Khalasar in the Red Waste, Daenerys Targaryen tends to her dragon eggs with no knowledge of the chaos consuming the kingdom she hopes one day to reclaim. The silver-haired girl sits beside a small fire, turning the ancient eggs in her hands and feeling the warmth that seems to pulse within their scaled shells. She knows nothing of Ned Stark's execution, nothing of the war that rages between the great houses, nothing of the opportunities and dangers that are reshaping the political landscape of Westeros. Her world consists of endless red sand, the small group of Dothraki who remain loyal to her, and the growing certainty that her destiny lies not in following the paths others have laid out, but in forging her own. The dragon eggs seem to whisper to her in voices only she can hear, promising power beyond anything the squabbling lords of Westeros can imagine. Fire and blood, the words of her house, take on new meaning as she contemplates the ancient prophecies and the dreams that visit her in the long watches of the night. She does not know that the kingdom she seeks to conquer is tearing itself apart, making her eventual return both easier and more necessary. She does not know that the Game of Thrones has become a dance of death, where mercy is weakness, and honor is a luxury the living cannot afford. But she will learn, in time. The dragons will wake, and when they do, the changed world of Westeros will discover that the Targaryens have returned to reclaim what was always theirs by right of conquest and blood. For now, though, the girl sits beside her fire in the red waste, unknowing and unknown, while across the sea the realm burns in the aftermath of decisions that can never be undone. The bells of King's Landing have fallen silent, but their message echoes across the Seven Kingdoms like thunder before a storm. Ned Stark is dead, killed for speaking truth to power, and his death has transformed a rebellion into a war of extermination that will consume everything in its path. There can be no peace now, no negotiation, no compromise. Only fire and blood, and the terrible certainty that before this war ends, the map of Westeros will be redrawn in red. The Great Hall of Riverrun has never seen a gathering quite like this one. Lords from across the north and the Riverlands fill the ancient stone chamber, their banners creating a tapestry of allegiance that speaks to the gravity of the moment. The direwolf of Stark mingles with the leaping trout of Tully, the mailed fist of Glover beside the battle-axe of Serwyn, while the twin towers of Frey stand alongside the silver eagle of Lannister. But this is no celebration. The faces gathered beneath these proud banners are marked by grief and grim determination. Word of Ned Stark's execution has reached every corner of the Allied territories, and the lords who have come to Riverrun understand that they are not merely witnessing a coronation, they are choosing the path that will define the rest of their lives. Robb Stark stands before the assembled nobles, no longer the uncertain boy who accepted a crown thrust upon him by desperate circumstances. The young man who faces these lords has been transformed by loss and responsibility into something harder and more dangerous. His auburn hair catches the light from the great windows, but his blue eyes hold depths that speak of decisions that can never be undone. At his side stands Catelyn Stark, newly returned from her fruitless mission to the Eyrie. The journey to win her sister's support has aged her visibly, adding lines around her eyes and a tightness to her mouth that speaks to the weight she carries. The knowledge that Lysa Arryn will not open the veil to their cause burns in her chest like a wound that will not heal. "My lords," Robb begins, his voice carrying clearly through the hall despite its measured tone. "We gather today not in joy but in sorrow and in fury. We gather because the usurper's regime has shown its true nature, has revealed the depths to which it will sink in pursuit of power." A murmur runs through the assembled lords. Many have heard the details of Ned's execution, but hearing them spoken aloud in this formal setting gives them new weight and terrible finality. "They murdered my father," Robb continues, his voice growing stronger with each word. "They murdered Ned Stark, the most honorable man in the Seven Kingdoms, for the crime of speaking truth about Joffrey's bastard birth. They cut off his head on the steps of the great sept of Baelor and called it justice. Lord Rickard Karstark steps forward from the crowd, his weathered face twisted with rage that mirrors his king's own fury. Justice, your grace? There is no justice in King's Landing. There is only the will of murderers and usurpers. Aye, calls out Lord Jason Mallister, his silver eagle banner stirring as he moves. My own son fights in this war, risks his life for our cause. And for what? So that honourable men can be butchered like cattle by boy kings who know nothing of honour or duty. The anger in the hall is palpable, a living thing that feeds on itself and grows stronger with each voice raised in agreement. These are not courtiers playing at politics. These are warriors who have bled for their beliefs and seen their friends die for causes they thought just. Catelyn watches her son carefully, noting the way he controls the room's energy without seeming to try. This is not the uncertain boy who struggled with the crown's weight just weeks ago. This is a king who understands his power and knows how to use it. The question before us, Robb says, raising his hand for silence, is not whether we will have vengeance for this crime. The question is how we will achieve it and what price we are willing to pay. He turns toward his mother, acknowledging her presence with a slight nod. Lady Catelyn has returned from the Eyrie with word from my aunt, Lisa Arryn. Tell them what you found there, mother. Catelyn steps forward, her voice clear but heavy with disappointment. Lords of the North and Riverlands, I bring regretful news. Lady Lysa will not open the veil to our cause. She claims neutrality, says the veil will not be drawn into what she calls the madness beyond her borders. The silence that greets this announcement is profound. The Vale's military might would have been a significant addition to their cause, its fresh troops and untouched resources a decisive advantage against the Lannister forces. Lord Greatjon Umber's massive frame shakes with indignation. Neutrality? When her own brother-in-law lies dead? When the realm bleeds for want of justice? The Vale has always been apart from the rest of the kingdom, Catelyn says diplomatically. Lady Lysa fears for her son's safety above all other considerations. Then we win without the Vale, declares Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish stepping forward with the confidence of a man who has never lost a battle he was determined to win. We've proven we can defeat the Lannisters in the field. The Whispering Wood showed them that northern steel cuts as deep as southern gold. Robb nods, but his expression remains thoughtful. Victory in individual battles is not the same as winning a war, Uncle. The Lannisters still hold King's Landing, still control the Crown's resources. They have gold to buy sellswords and allies to replace their losses. He moves to a table laden with maps, his fingers tracing the borders between kingdoms with the attention of a student studying for his final examination. But they have also made mistakes, he continues. Tywin Lannister has committed his forces to burning the Riverlands. He seeks to punish us through terror and destruction, to break our will through brutality against innocent people. Lord Edmure Tully, heir to Riverrun, speaks up from his position near the great fireplace. My people suffer for our choices, Your Grace. Every day brings news of villages burned, of small folk killed for the crime of living in lands that have declared for you. And every day, Lord Tywin's army grows more spread out, more vulnerable, Robb replies. He has chosen a strategy that weakens him, even as it causes us pain. While he burns villages in the Riverlands, the Westerlands lie nearly undefended. The strategic implications become clear to the assembled lords. Tywin's campaign of terror requires him to scatter his forces across a wide area, leaving his own homeland vulnerable to attack. You propose to invade the Westerlands, Lord Karstark says, understanding dawning in his eyes. Strike at Casterly Rock while the lion is away from his den. Exactly. Robb's smile is sharp and predatory. Let Tywin burn every village between here and Harrenhal. While he's occupied with slaughtering innocents, we'll take the gold mines that fund his war, the ports that supply his armies, the castles that bear his name. The audacity of the plan sends a thrill through the gathered lords. Instead of pursuing Tywin's forces directly, meeting him where he is strongest, Robb proposes to force the great lord to abandon his campaign and race home to defend his own lands. But the logistics, Your Grace, Lord Edmure points out. To invade the Westerlands, we would need to cross significant territory, maintain supply lines across hostile ground. Which brings us to another matter, Robb says, his tone becoming more serious. Our alliance with House Frey remains crucial to our success. Lord Walder controls the only reliable crossing of the Trident, and his continued support is essential to any campaign we undertake. Catelyn nods, understanding her son's meaning immediately. The marriage pact. Lord Walder will expect his price to be paid. The arrangement hangs over the gathering like a sword, suspended by a hair. Robb's promise to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters or granddaughters has secured the allegiance of the twins, but it also binds the young king to a political marriage that may not serve his best interests. The Freys have proven their worth, Lord Lannister says carefully, but their price grows higher with each victory we achieve. All alliances have prices, Robb replies. The question is whether the cost is worth the benefit. Without the Frey crossing, we cannot move our armies effectively. Without Frey men, we lack the numbers to challenge Tywin directly. He looks around the hall, meeting the eyes of each major lord in turn. I have made promises to secure our alliance with the twins. I intend to honor those promises, whatever the personal cost. A king's word must be absolute, or it becomes meaningless. Lord Greatjon Umber raises his great sword in salute. Then we follow you to the Westerlands, Your Grace. We'll show the Lannisters what northern justice looks like when it comes calling at their own gates. Before we march anywhere, Catelyn interjects, we need to consider our other potential allies. The realm is fracturing, but that creates opportunities as well as dangers. Robb nods toward his mother, acknowledging her wisdom. Indeed, ravens have been sent to Highgarden and to Sunspear, offering terms for alliance against the Lannisters. The Tyrells have stayed neutral thus far, but Ned Stark's execution may change their calculations. The Martells have old grievances against the Lannisters that run deeper than political convenience. And what of Stannis Baratheon? Asks Lord Karstark. Robert's brother has the stronger claim to the Iron Throne than the bastard boy who sits it now. Stannis is a hard man, but an honorable one, Robb admits. Under different circumstances, we might find common cause. But he will never accept the North's independence, will never allow the kingdom to fragment while he lives. The political complexities of their situation weigh heavily on the young king's shoulders. Every potential alliance comes with costs and complications that could prove as dangerous as their enemies' swords. Then we fight our own war, declares Sir Brynden Tully. We rely on our own strength, our own courage, our own determination to see justice done. Aye, agrees Lord Greatjon, his massive voice booming through the hall. The North remembers, and the North doesn't forgive. Let the Southrons play their games of crowns and thrones. We'll carve our own path through their armies. Robb stands silent for a moment, absorbing the fierce loyalty of his followers, feeling the weight of their expectations and their trust. When he speaks again, his voice carries the authority of a man who has fully accepted the burden of kingship. Then it is decided. We will strike at the Westerlands, while Tywin is occupied in his campaign of terror. We will force him to abandon his brutality and come home to defend his own lands, and when he does, we will be ready for him." He moves toward the center of the hall, where an ancient crown rests on a simple wooden table. It is not the elaborate golden circlet of southern kings, but rather a bronze band set with iron spikes, the crown of winter, worn by the kings in the north for thousands of years before Aegon's conquest. But first, we formalize what has already been accepted by deed and proclamation. My lords, will you crown me in the sight of gods and men as your rightful king? The response is immediate and thunderous. Every sword in the hall rings from its scabbard. Every voice joins in acclamation of their chosen monarch. This is not the uncertain crown-taking that followed Ned's imprisonment. This is the solemn consecration of a king who has proven himself worthy through deed and sacrifice. Lord Karstark lifts the crown of winter with reverent hands, the ancient bronze gleaming in the light from the great windows. "Robb of House Stark," he intones formally, "do you swear before the old gods and the new to rule justly, to defend your people, and to uphold the ancient laws and customs of the North?" "I do so swear," Robb replies, kneeling before the assembled lords with the dignity befitting a king accepting the ultimate responsibility. The crown settles onto his head with the weight of centuries, each iron spike a reminder of the harsh justice that northern kings have dispensed since the dawn of history. When Robb rises, he does so as something more than the young man who entered this hall. He rises as the king in the north, chosen by his people and consecrated by their faith. "Long live the king!" The cry echoes through the hall and out into the courtyard beyond, where thousands of northern and riverlands soldiers take up the chant. "The king in the north! Long live the king!" Far to the north, at the wall that guards the realm of men from the terrors beyond, Jon Snow receives the news of his father's death with the stoic acceptance expected of a man sworn to the Night's Watch. He stands in the Lord Commander's solar, reading the message that has travelled hundreds of leagues to reach this remote fortress, feeling the words cut through him like blades of ice. "I'm sorry for your loss," Lord Commander Jeor Mormont says, quietly, his weathered face showing genuine sympathy for the young man's grief. "Ned Stark was a good man, an honourable man. The realm is poorer for his passing." Jon nods, not trusting his voice to remain steady if he tries to speak. The vows he has taken bind him to the wall, forbid him from involving himself in the quarrels of the realm he has left behind. But those same vows cannot prevent him from feeling the loss of the man who raised him, who gave him a name and a place in the world even when custom said he deserved neither. "The Watch has need of men like you," Mormont continues, studying Jon with the keen eyes that have made him one of the most effective Lord Commanders in the organization's history. Men who understand duty, who can put the needs of the realm above personal desires. "Yes, my lord," Jon manages, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. "My place is here, on the wall. My family, my half-brother. They have their war to fight. I have mine." But even as he speaks the words, Jon feels the pull of blood and loyalty tugging at his heart. Somewhere far to the south, Robb wears a crown and fights for justice and vengeance. Somewhere in King's Landing, his sisters face dangers he cannot even imagine. And here he stands, bound by vows to remain apart from it all, to watch and guard, while those he loves face their trials alone. The Night's Watch has claimed him, but it cannot claim his heart. That belongs to Winterfell, to the family that raised him, to the brother who has become a king and the father who died for his principles. In the God's Wood beyond Castle Black's walls, the heart tree stands silent, witness to Jon Snow's grief, its carved face seeming to weep red tears for all the losses that war brings to those who survive. The crown weighs heavy on Robb Stark's head as he plans his war of vengeance, but it weighs no heavier than the grief that fills his bastard brother's heart as he keeps his lonely vigil on the wall. Both brothers serve duty in their own way. Both pay the price that honor demands. But the war continues, and the North remembers. Justice will come to those who murdered Ned Stark, whatever the cost, whatever the price, in blood and gold and broken hearts. The king in the North has been crowned, and his reign will be written in fire and steel across the battlefields of the Seven Kingdoms. The smoke rises from a dozen villages across the Riverlands, black columns that stain the autumn sky like funeral pyres for the innocent dead. From the battlements of Harrenhal, the ancient castle that has seen more blood than any fortress in the Seven Kingdoms, Tywin Lannister watches his new strategy take shape with the cold satisfaction of a man who understands that wars are won through will as much as steel. Below him in the castle's great courtyard, his soldiers go about their grim work with mechanical efficiency. Prisoners taken from the latest skirmishes kneel in neat rows, their hands bound behind their backs, their faces bearing the hollow resignation of men who know their fate. These are not the high-born captives who might traditionally be ransomed or exchanged. These are common soldiers, farmers' sons and merchants' boys who took up arms for the king in the North. Under the old rules of war, such men might have been imprisoned or even released on promise of good behavior. But Tywin Lannister has declared the old rules dead, killed in the Whispering Wood alongside his first-born son. "No quarter," he had commanded, and his men implement that order with ruthless precision. The executions begin at dawn and continue until the sun reaches its zenith, each death a message sent across the Riverlands that the price of supporting Robb Stark has become higher than most men can afford to pay. Sir Amory Lorch approaches the Lord of Casterly Rock with the measured stride of a man reporting routine business. His scarred face shows no emotion as he delivers his report, though his armor still bears stains from the morning's work. "The prisoners have been dealt with, my lord. 87 men, all confirmed to have fought under Stark banners. Their bodies will be displayed along the King's Road as you commanded." Tywin nods without looking away from the smoke-stained horizon. "And the village burnings? How many settlements have been cleared?" 12 since yesterday, my lord. We've followed your orders precisely. Any village that provided supplies to Stark forces has been burned, their adult men executed, women and children driven off to spread word of our policy. "Good." Tywin's voice carries no more emotion than if he were discussing crop yields or tax collections. "Terror is a tool like any other, Sir Amory. Used properly, it can end wars more efficiently than a dozen battles." The knight shifts uncomfortably, though he has carried out far worse orders in service to House Lannister. "My lord, the refugees, they're fleeing toward Riverrun and the Northern Territories. Thousands of them, clogging the roads, spreading stories of our campaigns." "Excellent," Tywin replies, finally turning to face his subordinate. "Let them carry word of what befalls those who support rebellion. Let them tell Robb Stark exactly what his decision to murder my son has cost the innocent people of the Riverlands." From his position overlooking the courtyard, Tywin can see the next group of prisoners being brought in chains toward the execution ground. Most are young, barely old enough to grow proper beards, their eyes wide with terror as they comprehend their fate. In another time, under different circumstances, he might have felt something approaching pity for them. But pity is a luxury he cannot afford. Jaime is dead, cut down by northern savages who mistake brutality for justice. The Lannister name, built over generations into the most feared and respected in the Seven Kingdoms, has been stained with the blood of his heir. Only by responding with overwhelming force can he hope to restore the deterrent effect that has kept his enemies at bay for decades. "Double the patrols," he orders Ser Amory. "I want every road watched, every village visited. Any settlement that shows signs of supporting the rebels burns. Any man who cannot prove his loyalty to the crown dies. Any woman who speaks ill of King Joffrey loses her tongue." The brutality of the orders would have shocked the lords of Westeros just months ago. Now they represent the new reality of a war that has abandoned all pretense of civilized conduct. "It will be done, my lord," Ser Amory acknowledges, though something in his tone suggests even he finds these commands extreme. "See that it is. And send word to Sir Gregor. His campaign in the eastern Riverlands should match our pace here. I want the entire region to understand that supporting Robb Stark brings nothing but death and destruction." As Ser Amory withdraws to carry out his orders, Tywin returns his attention to the horizon, where fresh smoke columns mark the locations of newly destroyed settlements. Each pillar of black represents dozens of lives ended, hundreds more displaced, the systematic dismantling of a way of life that has existed for centuries. But this is the price of defying House Lannister. This is the cost of murdering his son. At River Run, the reports arrive with sickening regularity. Ravens bearing news of villages burned, of prisoners executed, of refugees streaming across the countryside in growing numbers. Each message adds another weight to the burden that sits on Robb Stark's shoulders, another reminder of the consequences his choices have unleashed upon innocent people. The young king stands in the castle's war room, surrounded by maps that now seem inadequate to capture the scope of the devastation being wrought across his kingdom. Red pins mark reported locations of Lannister atrocities, their number growing with each passing day until the Riverlands resembles nothing so much as a battlefield covered in blood. "How many?" he asks quietly, not looking up from the latest report clutched in his hands. "The village of Wendish Town," replies Maester Wyman, his voice heavy with sorrow. 43 men executed, the buildings burned, the survivors fleeing north toward our lines, the same pattern as the others. Robb closes his eyes, feeling the weight of each reported death like a physical blow. These people died because they supported his cause, because they believed in the justice of his rebellion against Joffrey's bastard rule. Their blood is on his hands as surely as if he had wielded the sword himself. "Your Grace," says Sir Brendan Tully, the Blackfish studying his great-nephew with concerned eyes, "this is not your fault. Tywin Lannister chooses his own methods. You cannot be held responsible for his brutality." "Can't I?" Robb's voice carries a bitter edge that was not there before the war began. "I executed Jaime Lannister, knowing it would provoke retaliation. I chose vengeance over mercy, and now innocent people pay the price for my decision." Lord Rickard Karstark steps forward, his weathered face stern with conviction. "You chose justice, Your Grace. The Kingslayer got what he deserved for his crimes. That Tywin Lannister responds with madness and butchery only proves the corruption of his house." "Justice?" Robb repeats the word as if tasting something bitter. "Tell that to the women and children fleeing their burning homes. Tell that to the men who die for the crime of believing in our cause." The silence that follows is heavy with the weight of moral complexity that has no easy answers. Every man in the room understands the trap they face. To show mercy to enemies who show none is to invite more suffering. But to match brutality with brutality is to become the very thing they claim to fight against. Catelyn Stark enters the war room carrying a bundle of letters, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. The constant stream of refugees has taxed Riverrun's resources to the breaking point, and the stories they bring grow more horrific with each passing day. "The latest reports from our scouts," she says, setting the letters on the map table. "Tywin's forces have taken Harrenhal and are using it as a base for their operations. They've turned the entire castle into an execution ground." Robb picks up one of the letters, scanning its contents with growing anger. They're not just targeting soldiers anymore. Merchants, farmers, anyone suspected of providing aid to our cause. This isn't warfare. This is systematic terror. "It's effective," admits Lord Jason Lannister reluctantly. "Fear is a powerful weapon. Each village that burns sends a message to 10 others. Support the rebels and face destruction." "Then we change our strategy," declares the Blackfish, moving to the map table and placing his finger on key locations. "We cannot match Tywin's brutality, but we can make him pay for it." All eyes turn to the veteran commander as he outlines his thinking. Sir Brynden Tully has fought in more campaigns than most men have seen winters, and his tactical insights have proven invaluable throughout the war. "Tywin's forces are spread across a wide area," he continues. "His terror campaign requires him to divide his strength, to send columns of men to burn villages and execute prisoners. That makes them vulnerable to harassment." "Guerrilla tactics," Robb says, understanding immediately. "Hit them when they're isolated. Avoid direct confrontation with their main force." "Precisely. Small groups of mounted archers, moving fast, striking hard, disappearing into the countryside before they can respond. Make them pay for every atrocity. Turn their strength against them." The strategy has merit, but it also represents a fundamental change in how they wage war. Instead of the traditional battles between armies that have defined conflicts between the great houses, this would be a shadowy campaign of ambush and assassination. "And while we harass Tywin's forces in the Riverlands," Robb says slowly, his mind working through the implications, "we send another force to invade the Westerlands, force him to choose between continuing his terror campaign and defending his homeland." Lord Karstark nods approvingly. "Split his attention, divide his forces. Make him fight on 2 fronts while we concentrate our strength where it can do the most damage." "But the risks," Catelyn interjects. "Dividing our own forces weakens us in both theatres. If Tywin defeats one of our armies, then we lose half our strength," Robb acknowledges. "But if we do nothing, we lose everything. This terror campaign will break our support among the small folk. Fear will accomplish what Lannister gold and steel could not." He moves to the window, looking out over the courtyard where refugees continue to arrive in increasing numbers. Their faces tell the story of the war's new reality. Hollow-eyed children who have seen their fathers killed, women clutching possessions salvaged from burning homes, old men who have lost everything they spent lifetimes building. "We implement both strategies," he decides, turning back to face his war council. "The Blackfish will take a force of light cavalry and begin harassing Tywin's columns. Hit them when they're vulnerable. Make them afraid to leave their main camps." "And the invasion of the Westerlands?" asks Lord Mallister. "I'll lead that myself," Robb declares. "Take the main force west while Tywin is occupied with his butchery. Strike at the heart of Lannister power while the lion is away from his den." The audacity of the plan sends a thrill through the assembled lords. Instead of reacting defensively to Tywin's terror campaign, they will seize the initiative and force him to respond to their moves. "When do we march?" Lord Karstark asks. "Immediately," Robb replies. "Every day we delay, more innocent people die. Every village that burns strengthens Tywin's position and weakens ours. As the War Council disperses to make preparations for the campaign, Catelyn approaches her son with the measured steps of a mother who recognizes the change in her child. "You're different," she observes quietly. "Harder. The crown has changed you." Robb meets her gaze steadily, and she sees in his eyes the reflection of decisions that have cost him something essential, some innocence that can never be recovered. "The crown hasn't changed me, Mother. The war has. Tywin Lannister has taught me that mercy is a luxury I cannot afford, that honor is a weakness my enemies will exploit. Don't let his brutality make you like him," she pleads. "Don't let this war turn you into the kind of man who burns villages and executes prisoners." "I won't," Robb promises, but something in his tone suggests the distinction is becoming harder to maintain. "But I also won't let his brutality go unpunished. The people of the Riverlands deserve justice, and I intend to give it to them." 3 days later, the first major battle since Jaime's death erupts along the banks of the Red Fork. Sir Brynden Tully's harassment campaign has drawn a significant Lannister force away from their main camp, luring them into pursuit across difficult terrain where heavy cavalry cannot maneuver effectively. The battle is unlike anything the Riverlands has seen before. There are no banners flying proudly in the wind, no songs of glory echoing across the battlefield. This is a savage affair fought with tooth and claw, where quarter is neither asked nor given. Northern arrows find their marks with deadly precision, cutting down Lannister knights before they can close for melee combat. But when the lines do meet, the fighting is brutal, beyond anything the traditional rules of chivalric warfare would recognize. No prisoners are taken. Wounded enemies are finished where they lie. The Lannister force that rode out to crush the northern raiders is annihilated to the last man, their bodies left as a message for Tywin Lannister to find. When word of the victory reaches River Run, there is no celebration. The lords who fought in the battle return with hollow eyes and blood-stained swords, understanding that they have crossed a line from which there can be no return. The war has evolved beyond political rebellion into something darker and more terrible. Both sides now fight with the knowledge that defeat means death, that mercy is a weakness their enemies will exploit, that the only victory worth having is total victory. Robb Stark prepares to march on the Westerlands with the grim determination of a king who has learned that sometimes justice requires terrible choices. The boy who once hesitated to execute a prisoner is gone, replaced by a man who understands that war is not a game played by rules that only one side follows. The Riverlands burn, but they will not burn alone. The Westerlands will learn what it means to face the wrath of the North, and Tywin Lannister will discover that brutality is a sword that cuts both ways. The war has entered a new phase, bloodier and more savage than anything Westeros has seen since Aegon's conquest. Before it ends, the map of the Seven Kingdoms will be redrawn in fire and blood, and the survivors will inherit a realm transformed beyond recognition. The mountain passes of the Golden Tooth have never echoed with the howl of northern wolves, but today they ring with sounds that will haunt these ancient peaks for generations to come. Robb Stark's army moves through the narrow defiles like a river of steel and fury, 20,000 men following their young king into the heart of Lannister power with the grim determination of soldiers who know they march toward their destiny. Grey wind pads alongside Robb's destrier, the great direwolf's red eyes scanning the rocky slopes for signs of ambush. The beast has grown massive in the months since the war began, his shoulders now reaching above a man's waist, his fangs as long as daggers. He moves with the fluid grace of a predator, perfectly adapted for killing, and the Lannister scouts who glimpse him from their hidden positions report back with voices tight with fear. The king in the north rides at the head of his host with the crown of winter upon his head, its iron spikes catching the pale autumn sunlight like the points of spears. His face bears the marks of the war's weight, lines around his eyes that speak of sleepless nights, a tightness to his jaw that reflects the burden of decisions no 19-year-old should have to make. Behind him march the banners of the North and the Riverlands, a confederation of houses that has never before united for such an audacious campaign. The grey direwolf of Stark leads them all, but around it flutter the standards that represent the military might of two kingdoms: the mailed fist of Glover, the battle-axe of Serwyn, the twin towers of Frey, the silver eagle of Mallister. The golden tooth lies just ahead, your grace, reports Sir Brynden Tully's captain of scouts, a grizzled veteran whose weathered face speaks of a lifetime spent in these mountains. Our advance riders confirm the castle is garrisoned, but not heavily. Perhaps 300 men. Robb nods, though his expression remains thoughtful. The Golden Tooth has guarded the entrance to the Westerlands for 1,000 years, its strategic position making it the key that unlocks access to the richest lands in the Seven Kingdoms. But its defenses were designed to hold against traditional sieges, not the kind of desperate assault his army is prepared to mount. "And word from the Riverlands?" he asks. "Any sign that Tywin has taken the bait?" "Lord Edmure's ravens report increasing Lannister activity," the scout replies. "Columns moving west, abandoning their positions along the Trident. It appears Sir Brynden's harassment campaign has done its work. The strategy is working exactly as planned. While the Blackfish's light cavalry strikes at Lannister supply trains and isolated garrisons, forcing Tywin to consolidate his scattered forces, Robb has led the main northern army on a forced march through difficult terrain to reach the western mountains ahead of any significant response. But Robb knows that their window of opportunity is closing rapidly. Once Tywin realizes the true scope of the northern invasion, he will abandon his terror campaign in the Riverlands and race west with his full strength. The Golden Tooth must fall quickly, or it will become a fortress that pins the northern army against the mountains with no route of escape. "Send word to Lord Karstark and Lord Umber," Robb commands. "We assault the castle at dawn. No siege engines, no extended investment. We take it by storm or we don't take it at all." The order ripples through the army like wildfire. Seasoned warriors check their weapons and armor with the methodical care of men who understand that tomorrow will bring either victory or death. Young recruits try to hide their fear behind displays of bravado, but their wide eyes betray the terror that grips every man before his first major battle. As the northern host makes camp in the shadow of the Golden Tooth's ancient walls, Robb walks among his soldiers with grey wind at his side. He stops to speak with common spearmen and great lords alike, sharing a word here, a jest there, reminding his followers why they chose to follow him into the heart of enemy territory. "Your Grace," calls out Sir Wendell Manderly, the corpulent knight's face flushed with exertion from the mountain crossing. "The men are asking about the assault tomorrow. They wonder if the castle will surrender once they see our numbers." Robb pauses beside the White Harbour Knight, noting the hope in his voice. Sir Wendell is a good man, loyal and brave, but he still clings to the idea that wars can be won without massive bloodshed, that enemies might see reason when faced with overwhelming force. "They won't surrender," Robb says quietly, his voice carrying to the soldiers gathered around their cooking fires. The Golden Tooth is the key to the Westerlands. Whoever holds it controls access to the gold mines and ports that fund the Lannister war machine. They'll fight to the last man rather than give it up. The soldiers absorb this news with the stoic acceptance of men who have learned that their young king speaks truth, however unpleasant it might be. These are not the wide-eyed recruits who followed him from Winterfell months ago. They are veterans hardened by battle and loss, men who understand that victory requires sacrifice. Then we'll give them a fight they won't forget, declares Sir Small John Umber, the giant sun towering above the gathered men like a tree among saplings. Let them see what northern steel can do when it's properly motivated. The laughter that follows is harsh and cold, the sound of men who have seen too much death to find humor in anything but the prospect of visiting violence upon their enemies. These soldiers have witnessed the aftermath of Tywin's terror campaign, have seen the burned villages and executed prisoners, have heard the stories of women and children driven from their homes. As night falls over the Golden Tooth, both armies prepare for the battle that will determine the fate of the Westerlands. Within the castle walls, Lord Lefford's garrison makes what preparations they can, knowing that they face overwhelming odds, but determined to hold their position as long as possible. Dawn comes grey and cold, with a wind that carries the scent of snow from the high peaks. Robb stands in his command position overlooking the castle, surrounded by his war council and the great lords who have followed him into this desperate gamble. "Remember," he tells them, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air, "we have one chance at this. If the assault fails, if we get bogged down in a siege, Tywin will arrive with his full army and trap us against these mountains." Lord Rickard Karstark nods grimly, his weathered hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "My men are ready, Your Grace. We'll take those walls or die trying." "And mine," adds Lord Greatjon Umber, his massive frame bristling with barely contained violence. "The bastards killed your father, burned our lands, murdered our people. Time to show them the price of crossing the north." The assault begins with a flight of arrows that darkens the sky like a cloud of locusts. Northern longbowmen, veterans of countless hunting trips in the Wolfswood, send their shafts arcing over the castle walls with deadly precision. Lannister defenders fall from the battlements, their cries echoing off the mountain peaks as the first blood of the battle flows. But arrows alone cannot take a castle. As the missile barrage continues, Robb signals for the main assault to begin. Thousands of northern soldiers surge forward with ladders and ropes, their war cries echoing through the narrow passes as they race across the killing ground before the walls. The defenders respond with their own volleys, crossbow bolts and stones raining down on the attackers as they struggle to reach the base of the walls. Men fall by the dozens, their blood staining the rocky ground. But still the assault continues with relentless determination. Grey Wind leads the charge with terrifying ferocity. The great direwolf leaping higher than any normal beast could manage to seize a defender who leans too far over the battlements. The man's scream is cut short as the wolf's massive jaws close around his throat and his body tumbles into the courtyard below. The sight of their king's direwolf in action sends a surge of savage joy through the northern ranks. These men have grown up with stories of the old kings of winter, legendary figures who rode to war with direwolves at their sides and carved out a kingdom through strength and will. Today, they see those legends made flesh. Robb himself leads the escalade, climbing one of the siege ladders with his sword between his teeth and his crown still upon his head. Arrows whistle past him as he climbs, and stones crash around the ladder's base. But he continues upward with the fearless determination that has made him a legend among his followers. Behind him come his household guards, men chosen for their skill and loyalty, sworn to die before they let harm come to their king. They follow Robb over the battlements in a wave of northern steel, cutting down defenders with the efficient brutality of professional killers. The battle for the walls is savage and brief. Outnumbered 10-1, the Lannister defenders fight with desperate courage, but cannot hold their positions against the overwhelming northern assault. Within an hour of the attack's beginning, the banners of House Stark fly from the Golden Tooth's highest tower. But even as Robb's forces secure the castle, scouts bring word that changes everything. A massive dust cloud approaches from the east, Tywin Lannister's army, racing west with the desperate speed of a man trying to save his homeland from invasion. "How long?" Robb asks his scouts, though he dreads the answer. "They'll be here by tomorrow evening at the latest, Your Grace. Maybe sooner if they push through the night." The strategic situation has shifted dramatically. Instead of having time to rest and consolidate their position, Robb's army must prepare immediately for a battle against the most skilled commander in the Seven Kingdoms. Tywin is coming with his full strength, and he will be fighting for his homeland with all the fury that desperation can provide. "Send ravens to the Blackfish," Robb orders. "Tell him to continue harassing any Lannister forces still in the Riverlands, but not to attempt to link up with us. We're on our own now." Lord Karstark approaches with a grim expression, his armor still blood-stained from the assault on the castle. "Your Grace, our casualties from the assault. How many?" 400 dead, twice that wounded. Lord Serwyn among the fallen, along with Sir Roderick Ricewell and a dozen other knights. The numbers hit Robb like physical blows. These are not faceless statistics, but men he knew personally. Lords who bent the knee to him, knights who shared meals in his tent and offered counsel in his war councils. Each death diminishes not just his military strength, but his political base among the northern houses. "Their sacrifice will be remembered," he says formally, though the words feel inadequate in the face of such loss. "Make sure their bodies are prepared for return to the north. Their families deserve to lay them to rest in their ancestral grounds." As the army prepares defensive positions around the captured castle, more disturbing news arrives from the battle's aftermath. The assault on the Golden Tooth, though successful, has revealed the true cost of the war's escalation. The northern soldiers who stormed the walls showed no mercy to the defeated garrison, killing wounded enemies and executing prisoners with the same brutality they have witnessed from Lannister forces. "Your Grace," reports Sir Smalljan Umber, his usually jovial face troubled. "The men, they're different than they were at the beginning of this war. Harder. They don't give quarter anymore. Don't show mercy to enemies who surrender." Robb nods grimly, recognizing a truth he has tried not to acknowledge. The war has changed all of them, transforming idealistic young men into killers who understand that mercy is a luxury their enemies have abandoned. "This is what Tywin Lannister has made us," he says quietly. "His brutality has forced us to match it, or watch our people suffer while we cling to outdated notions of honor." The next morning brings the sound every northern soldier has been dreading. War horns echoing from the mountain passes, announcing the arrival of Tywin Lannister's host. From the battlements of the Golden Tooth, Robb watches as one of the most magnificent military spectacles in Westerosi history unfolds before his eyes. 40,000 men march in perfect formation through the narrow defiles, their banners creating a sea of crimson and gold that stretches as far as the eye can see. At their head rides Tywin Lannister himself, mounted on a destrier, as golden as his hair once was, his presence commanding enough to make hardened veterans straighten their backs and grip their weapons more tightly. This is no mere army. It is the concentrated military might of the wealthiest kingdom in Westeros, led by a commander whose tactical brilliance has never been matched on any battlefield. For the first time since the war began, Robb faces an enemy who possesses every advantage, except the desperate fury of men fighting for their homes and families. He's brought everything, observes Lord Umber, studying the approaching host through a spyglass. Every banner in the Westerlands, plus the troops he pulled back from the Riverlands. We're outnumbered 2 to 1. Then we'll have to be twice as fierce, Robb replies, his hand moving to Grey Wind's head as the great dire wolf growls at the approaching enemy. Send word to all unit commanders. We hold this position until they break against us, or until we're all dead. There is no retreat, no surrender, no quarter asked or given. The Battle of the Golden Tooth begins at midday, with a thunder that shakes the very mountains. Tywin's assault comes from 3 directions simultaneously, his superior numbers allowing him to stretch Robb's defences to the breaking point, while maintaining reserves that can exploit any weakness. The fighting is unlike anything Westeros has seen since the War of Conquest. Neither side gives ground willingly. Neither commander accepts anything less than total victory. The narrow passes echo with the clash of steel on steel, the screams of wounded men, the roars of warriors drunk on battle fury, and the proximity of death. Grey Wind becomes the symbol of northern resistance, the great direwolf ranging across the battlefield like a legend made flesh. Lannister soldiers flee in terror when they see him coming, and those too slow to escape die with their throats torn out by fangs as long as daggers. But even direwolf fury cannot overcome mathematical reality. Slowly, inexorably, Tywin's superior numbers begin to tell. Northern formations buckle under the weight of repeated assaults, and gaps appear in the defensive line that Lannister knights exploit with deadly efficiency. Fall back to the secondary positions, Robb orders, his voice hoarse from shouting commands over the din of battle. Make them pay for every foot of ground. The northern retreat is conducted with professional skill, but it cannot disguise the fact that they are being pushed back by an enemy who refuses to accept anything less than complete victory. The cost in blood is staggering on both sides. The rocky ground is carpeted with the dead and dying, and the mountain streams run red with the blood of fallen warriors. As evening approaches and exhaustion begins to claim fighters on both sides, a strange stillness settles over the battlefield. Both armies have fought themselves to a standstill, neither able to deliver the decisive blow that will break their enemy's resistance. Robb stands among his surviving commanders, his crown askew and his armor dented by enemy blows, surveying the carnage with eyes that have seen too much death in too short a time. "Casualties?" he asks quietly. 3,000 dead, twice that wounded, Lord Karstark reports, his voice heavy with grief. "We've lost Lord Serwyn, Sir Helman Tallheart, Lord Hornwood, and a dozen other bannermen. Our fighting strength is cut by more than half. The political implications are as devastating as the military ones. Each dead lord represents not just lost troops, but weakened support among the northern houses. The coalition that crowned Robb king is bleeding away one battle at a time. And Tywin's losses? Heavy, Your Grace. Perhaps 4,000 dead, though they can better afford the cost. He still has 30,000 effective fighters to our 10,000. But numbers alone do not tell the complete story. Tywin's assault has been blunted, his army bloodied and exhausted by the northern resistance. Most importantly, winter is coming to the mountains, and the Lannister forces are not equipped for the harsh weather that will soon make campaigning impossible. He'll withdraw, Robb predicts, studying the enemy positions through the gathering dusk. He's achieved his strategic objective, stopped our invasion of the Westerlands, and bled our army white. Now he'll fall back to more defensible positions and wait for spring. The prediction proves accurate. By dawn, Tywin's host has vanished like morning mist, withdrawing deeper into the Westerlands with the disciplined efficiency that has made him legendary. They leave behind their dead and the smouldering ruins of their abandoned camps, but they take with them the knowledge that the northern invasion has been stopped cold. Robb's army holds the Golden Tooth, but it is a Pyrrhic victory that tastes more of defeat than triumph. The young king stands among the bodies of his fallen lords, feeling the weight of crowns and consequences that grow heavier with each passing day. Winter is coming to the mountains, and with it the terrible certainty that this war is far from over. The Battle of the Golden Tooth has been fought and won, but the price of victory may prove higher than any kingdom can afford to pay. Grey wind howls mournfully from the battlements, his cry echoing off the mountain peaks like a lament for all the brave men who will never see their homes again. The sound carries across the blood-stained battlefield, a reminder that even in victory, war demands sacrifices that can never be undone. The ravens that carry news of the Battle of the Golden Tooth reach every corner of the 7 kingdoms within days, their black wings bearing tidings that reshape the political landscape of Westeros like an earthquake, reshaping the very ground. In halls of power from Dragonstone to Old Town, from Storm's End to the Eyrie, lords and kings read the reports with calculations that have nothing to do with honor and everything to do with opportunity. On the wind-swept battlements of Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon studies the message with the grim satisfaction of a man whose darkest predictions have been proven correct. The stern lord stands like a statue carved from granite, his jaw set in lines that speak of iron determination as he contemplates the implications of what he has just read. "Robb Stark has bled Tywin Lannister's army white," he says to Davos Seaworth, his most trusted advisor, standing beside him in the salt-laden wind. Both armies are crippled. Winter is closing the mountain passes, and King's Landing sits undefended. Davos nods, understanding his lord's thinking immediately. The one-time smuggler has learned to read the political currents as skillfully as he once read wind and tide, and he sees the same opportunity that has set Stannis's pale blue eyes alight with calculation. "Aye, my lord, with Tywin trapped in the Westerlands and his forces reduced by half, there's no army left to defend the capital. The boy king sits on his throne with nothing but gold cloaks and whatever household guards remain." "More than that," Stannis continues, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who has seen the gods grant him the perfect moment to strike. "Cersei Lannister rules as regent without her father's guidance, without her brother's protection, without the military strength that has kept their family in power. She is isolated, vulnerable, ripe for the taking. The fleet that rides at anchor in Blackwater Bay represents the fruits of months of preparation. 200 ships carrying 20,000 men sworn to Stannis Baratheon's cause. Knights from the Stormlands, soldiers from houses that remember their oaths to Robert's true heir, sellswords paid with promises of gold from the royal treasury once the Iron Throne is secured. "When do we sail, my lord?" Davos asks, though he already knows the answer from the set of his lord's shoulders. "With the morning tide," Stannis replies. "The gods have handed us this chance, and I intend to take it. By the time Tywin Lannister digs himself out of the mountain snows, I will sit the Iron Throne and rule as the rightful king of the 7 kingdoms." Far to the south, at Storm's End, Renly Baratheon receives the same news, with very different calculations running through his mind. The youngest Baratheon brother has always understood the importance of timing in politics, and he recognizes that the mutual bloodletting between Stark and Lannister forces has created opportunities that extend far beyond the immediate military situation. "This changes everything," he tells Sir Loras Tyrell, as they walk through the gardens that have made Storm's End famous, despite its grim reputation, as an impregnable fortress. Both armies have been crippled, both sides desperate for allies. Whoever moves first with fresh forces will dictate the terms of any final settlement. The Knight of Flowers nods, his handsome face bright with the excitement of a young man who sees glory beckoning from the horizon. The Reach has stayed neutral too long, my lord. My father grows impatient with inaction, while the realm bleeds around us. And well he should, Renly agrees, his smile containing all the charm that has made him popular among the lords who value charisma over stern duty. But Lord Mace has been wise to wait. Now he can choose his moment, pick the winning side with the certainty that comes from seeing all the players reveal their true strength. The political dance that will determine Westeros's future has entered a new phase, one where the great houses that preserved their strength while others bled will hold the balance of power. Renly has spent months building alliances, promising rewards to those who support his claim, positioning himself as the alternative to both his grim older brother and the boy king who murdered Ned Stark. "Send ravens to Highgarden," he commands. "Tell Lord Mace that the moment has come to choose sides. Stannis sails for King's Landing with a broken fleet and exhausted soldiers. I offer fresh armies, untested troops, and the promise of a reign built on cooperation rather than conquest." In King's Landing itself, the news of the Golden Tooth arrives like a hammer blow to a court already reeling from months of crisis and catastrophe. Tyrion Lannister reads the reports in the Tower of the Hand with the bitter recognition that his family's position has become far more precarious than even his cynical mind had imagined possible. The Dwarf Lord sits behind his father's desk, surrounded by maps and ledgers that speak to the immensity of the task facing him. In Tywin's absence, the responsibility for defending the capital has fallen to him, a responsibility he never sought but cannot abandon without dooming his family and everyone who serves them. "How many men can we muster?" he asks Bronn, the sellsword captain who has become his most trusted enforcer in a city where trust is rarer than Valyrian steel. "Maybe 8,000, if we count every gold cloak, every household guard, every man who can hold a spear without falling over," Bronn replies, with the brutal honesty that has made him valuable, despite his low birth and criminal background. Against Stannis's 20,000, we're as good as dead. Tyrion nods grimly, understanding that conventional military wisdom offers no hope of victory in the coming battle. But conventional wisdom has never been his strength. Survival through cleverness and desperation has served him better than honor or martial prowess. "Then we don't fight conventionally," he declares, moving to a detailed map of Blackwater Bay that shows every approach to the capital's harbors. "We use what advantages we have: knowledge of the city's defenses, control of the harbor chains, and the element of surprise." His plan takes shape as he speaks, a desperate gambit that relies more on wildfire and cunning than on steel and courage. The Alchemist's Guildhall contains enough of the volatile green substance to turn Blackwater Bay into an inferno, but only if the timing is perfect and the gods favor the desperate over the righteous. "You're talking about burning most of Stannis's fleet," Bronn observes, understanding the implications immediately, "assuming your pyromancers don't blow us all to the seven hells in the process." "Better to risk death by wildfire than accept certain defeat by sword," Tyrion replies. "At least this way we have a chance." But even as he plans the defense of King's Landing, Tyrion knows that military victory alone will not be enough. The political situation has deteriorated to the point where even successful defense might prove meaningless if his family's allies abandon them for more promising alternatives. In the Red Keep's royal chambers, Queen Regent Cersei receives the news from the Golden Tooth with a mixture of relief and growing paranoia that has consumed her rational thought processes since Jaime's death. Her brother's victory over Robb Stark should be cause for celebration, but the cost in blood and political capital has left her more isolated and vulnerable than ever before. Father has bled half his army away for a meaningless castle in the mountains, she rages to Qyburn, the former Maester, whose willingness to practice forbidden arts has made him useful despite his exile from the citadel. While he plays war games with the northern pretender, our real enemies gather their strength for the killing blow. The Queen Regent paces her solar like a caged lioness, her golden hair wild from repeated passages of her fingers through its length. The controlled fury that marked her response to Jaime's death has evolved into something more dangerous, a paranoid suspicion that sees enemies in every shadow and betrayal, behind every gesture of loyalty. "Your Grace," Qyburn says carefully, his voice carrying the soothing tones he has learned to use when dealing with Cersei's increasingly volatile moods. "Perhaps we should consider reaching out to potential allies. Lord Mace Tyrell has remained neutral thus far, but the right offer might—" "The Tyrells." Cersei's laugh is sharp and bitter. "You think those rose-growing fools will help us now, when we're weak and desperate? They'll wait until the battle is over, then offer their support to whoever emerges victorious." Her paranoia contains enough truth to make it particularly dangerous. The great houses that have preserved their strength while others bled are indeed calculating their best opportunities, and loyalty to the crown means less than political advantage when the realm fragments into competing factions. "What of Lady Sansa?" Qyburn asks, recognizing that the Stark girl represents one of their few remaining political assets. She could be useful in negotiations with her brother, or as leverage against other northern houses. Cersei's eyes light up with malicious pleasure at the mention of her most helpless prisoner. Since Jaime's death and Ned's execution, her treatment of Sansa has grown increasingly cruel, as if tormenting the girl can somehow ease the pain of her own losses. "Bring her," Cersei commands. "Let the little bird see how her precious family's rebellion has fared. Let her understand the price of defying House Lannister." When Sansa is brought to the Solar, the change in her appearance shocks even Qyburn's professional detachment. The girl who once dreamed of marrying a prince and living happily in the capital has been transformed by months of captivity and abuse into something brittle and hollow-eyed. Her auburn hair hangs limp and unwashed around a face marked by constant fear and inadequate nutrition. The fine gowns that once marked her as a lord's daughter have been replaced by servant's clothing, and her hands bear the calluses of kitchen work that no high-born lady should ever have to perform. "Your Grace," Sansa says quietly, her voice barely above a whisper as she performs the curtsy that has been beaten into her through months of harsh correction. "Tell me, little bird," Cersei says with false sweetness, "what do you think of the news from the Golden Tooth? Your brother has won a great victory, hasn't he?" Sansa's blue eyes flicker with something that might be hope before she suppresses the emotion, with the practiced skill of someone who has learned that showing feeling only invites more suffering. I don't know what your Grace means," she replies carefully, understanding that any answer she gives will be twisted into justification for further punishment. "Of course you don't," Cersei laughs, the sound containing no humor. "You wouldn't understand the cost of your family's rebellion. Thousands dead, both sides bled white, winter coming to trap them all in the mountains. Such a glorious victory for the king in the north." The cruelty in Cersei's voice makes it clear that she takes pleasure in describing the suffering of Sansa's family. But there is something else there too. A desperate need to convince herself that her enemies are paying a price for their defiance. "Your brother may have won his battle," Cersei continues, circling Sansa like a predator toying with wounded prey. But he's lost the war. Stannis sails for King's Landing with fresh troops, while Robb Stark bleeds in the mountains. Soon enough, there will be a new king on the Iron Throne, and then we'll see how much your family's rebellion was worth. As the Battle of Blackwater begins with the pre-dawn approach of Stannis' fleet, the political calculations of the great houses reach their moment of truth. In the harbour of King's Landing, Tyrion's desperate gambit unfolds with wildfire, turning the night sky green as Stannis' ships burn like torches on the dark water. The battle rages for hours, the outcome uncertain, until the last moment when a chain of events set in motion months ago finally reaches its conclusion. Stannis' ground assault breaks against the city walls, his forces reduced but not destroyed, while Tyrion's defenders hold their positions through courage and cunning. But victory comes at a terrible cost. Half of King's Landing burns, thousands of civilians die in the wildfire conflagration, and the city that was once the jewel of the Seven Kingdoms becomes a smoking ruin that will take years to rebuild. At Highgarden, Lord Mace Tyrell receives hourly reports of the battle's progress with the calculating patience of a man who understands that choosing the wrong moment to act can be more costly than never acting at all. The city burns, but the crown still holds, reports Sir Garland Tyrell, his weathered face grim with the knowledge of what they have witnessed from afar. Stannis has been defeated, but his fleet still controls most of Blackwater Bay. And Robb Stark remains trapped in the mountains with half an army, Lord Mace adds, his tone reflecting the complex calculations that will determine his house's next move. While Renly gathers fresh forces in the Stormlands and waits for someone else to bleed themselves white. The decision that emerges from these deliberations will reshape the political landscape of Westeros more dramatically than any battle could. The Tyrells choose to maintain their neutrality a while longer, waiting to see which faction emerges strongest from the mutual destruction that has consumed their enemies. We wait, Lord Mace declares. We let them exhaust themselves fighting over a crown that may not be worth having when the last battle ends. When the smoke clears and the survivors look for allies, then House Tyrell will make its choice. Across the narrow sea, in the red wastes of Essos, Daenerys Targaryen tends to her dragon eggs with no knowledge of the chaos consuming the kingdom she hopes one day to reclaim. The silver-haired girl sits beside her small fire, turning the ancient eggs in her hands and feeling the warmth that pulses within their scaled shells like heartbeats, waiting to begin. She knows nothing of the Battle of Blackwater, nothing of the mutual destruction between Stark and Lannister forces, nothing of the opportunities and dangers that are reshaping the political landscape of Westeros. Her world consists of endless red sand, the small group of Dothraki who remain loyal to her, and the growing certainty that her destiny lies not in following paths laid by others, but in forging her own. The dragon eggs whisper to her in voices only she can hear, promising power beyond anything the squabbling lords of Westeros can imagine. Fire and blood, the words of her house, take on new meaning as she contemplates the ancient prophecies that speak of dragons returning to the world. She does not know that the kingdom she seeks to conquer is tearing itself apart, that the great houses are bleeding themselves white in pursuit of crowns that may prove worthless, that the Iron Throne sits empty while pretenders and usurpers fight over its possession. But she will learn, in time. The dragons will wake, and when they do, the fractured realm of Westeros will discover that while they fought each other, a greater power has been growing in the eastern wastes, waiting for the moment to return home. In the Tower of the Hand, as dawn breaks over a King's Landing still smoking from the previous night's battle, Littlefinger surveys the devastation with the calculating satisfaction of a man whose plans have advanced another crucial step toward their ultimate goal. Lord Petter Baelish has spent months sowing discord, encouraging the very conflicts that have brought the realm to the brink of collapse. Each battle fought weakens the established order. Each dead lord creates new opportunities for clever men to advance their positions. "The realm bleeds," he observes to his reflection in a cracked mirror, his pale green eyes bright with the satisfaction of a gambler whose long-planned wager is finally paying dividends. But from blood comes opportunity, and from chaos comes the chance to remake the world according to new rules. The Game of Thrones has entered its most dangerous phase, where the traditional powers exhaust themselves in mutual destruction, while patient players wait for the moment to claim everything that remains. And in the red wastes of Essos, ancient magic stirs to wakefulness, preparing to remind the Seven Kingdoms that the Age of Dragons is not yet ended. The battle for the Iron Throne continues, but the throne itself may prove less important than the dragons that will soon cast their shadows over a realm transformed by war, magic, and the ambitions of those bold enough to seize power when it lies within their grasp. Winter comes to the mountains of the Westerlands like a predator, stalking wounded prey, silent and inexorable and deadly in its patient hunger. The first snows begin falling in the high passes 3 weeks earlier than even the oldest Meisters predicted, blanketing the peaks in white that grows deeper with each passing day until the ancient roads become impassable ribbons of ice and stone. Robb Stark stands on the walls of the captured Golden Tooth, watching his breath mist in the frigid air as he surveys the transformed landscape that has become both fortress and prison. Below him, his army huddles around whatever fires they can maintain, their numbers reduced by half from the brutal battle that won them this strategic position. 10,000 men, the remnant of the host that marched so confidently into enemy territory just weeks ago. The crown of winter sits heavy on his head, its iron spikes catching the pale light that filters through the grey clouds. Each day brings new reports that compound the desperate nature of their situation. Supply trains unable to reach them through the blocked passes, foraging parties returning empty-handed from a countryside stripped bare by Tywin's retreating forces, and always the inexorable advance of winter that threatens to trap them in these mountains until spring. "How long can we hold?" Robb asks Lord Karstark, one of the few senior commanders to survive the bloodletting at Golden Tooth. The weathered lord's face bears new lines, etched by grief and exhaustion, marking the loss of sons and friends whose bodies lie buried in the rocky soil of this foreign land. "Through winter, if we ration carefully," Karstark replies, though his tone suggests little confidence in such optimistic assessments. "But the men grow restless, Your Grace. They know they're trapped here, while their families face winter in the north without their protection." The truth of it weighs on Robb's shoulders like a physical burden. Every day they remain in the Westerlands is another day their people suffer without the protection of their lords and fighting men. Every choice he makes carries consequences that echo far beyond these mountain passes, touching lives he may never see but cannot forget. "And Tywin's position," Robb continues, moving to a map table, where scouts' reports detail the enemy's movements over the past fortnight. "Casterly Rock," Lord Umber answers, his massive frame somehow diminished by the losses they have sustained. He's withdrawn his entire force there, pulled back every garrison from the outer castles, and consolidated everything behind walls that have never fallen to assault. The strategic implications are clear to everyone gathered around the map. Tywin Lannister has chosen the most defensible position in the Westerlands, a fortress carved into living rock that could withstand siege for years if properly supplied. To attack it would be to throw away what remains of the northern army against walls that have defied conquerors since the age of heroes. We could try to starve them out, suggests Sir Wendell Manderley, though his voice lacks conviction. Cut off their supply lines, wait for hunger to do what swords cannot. With what army? Robb asks quietly. We barely have enough men to hold this single castle, let alone invest the largest fortress in Westeros. And winter grows stronger every day. Our men will freeze before Tywin's stores run low. The silence that follows carries the weight of unspoken recognition. They have achieved their strategic objective, forced Tywin to abandon his terror campaign in the Riverlands and race home to defend his own lands. But victory has come at a cost that may prove higher than any of them can afford to pay. A raven arrives as they debate their dwindling options, the black bird struggling against the mountain winds before reaching the safety of the castle's rookery. When the Maester brings the message to Robb, his face bears an expression of such gravity that conversation dies around the map table. Your Grace, the Maester begins, his aged voice heavy with reluctance to speak the words he carries. Word from the north, from Winterfell. Robb takes the parchment with hands that have learned to remain steady no matter what news they receive. But as his eyes scan the brief message, something fundamental shifts in his expression. The young king who has led armies and won battles seems to age years in the span of moments. What is it? Catelyn asks, moving to her son's side with the instinctive concern of a mother who recognizes catastrophe in her child's face. The Ironborn, Robb says quietly, the words emerging like stones dropped into still water. They've taken Winterfell. Theon Greyjoy leads them. Bran and Rickon. The message says they were killed trying to escape. The words hit the assembled lords like physical blows. Winterfell, the ancient seat of House Stark, symbol of northern power for 8,000 years, has fallen to raiders who struck while its defenders were away, fighting for justice in distant lands. And with it, the heirs to the kingdom, children whose deaths represent not just personal loss, but the potential end of the Stark line itself. No, Catelyn whispers, her face draining of all color as the magnitude of the disaster becomes clear. Not my babies, not Bran and Rickon. The grief that consumes her is terrible to witness, a mother's anguish at the loss of children she was meant to protect. But beneath the personal pain lies political catastrophe that threatens the very foundation of Robb's kingdom. Without heirs, without the ancient seat of power, what legitimacy does the king in the north possess? Theon, Robb says, and the single word carries betrayal and fury in equal measure. The boy who grew up as his brother, who shared meals and training and dreams of glory, who swore oaths of loyalty that seemed as solid as stone. That boy has become the instrument of his family's destruction. Lord Karstark's weathered hand moves to his sword hilt with reflexive anger. The turncoat bastard! I should have known better than to trust Ironborn scum. They have no honor, no loyalty, no understanding of bonds stronger than gold. He was my brother, Robb says, quietly, and the pain in his voice speaks to relationships severed and trust broken beyond any hope of repair. I trusted him with my family's safety. I left him to protect Winterfell while I pursued this war. You left him because you had no choice, Catelyn says, struggling to master her grief long enough to offer counsel. The war demanded your attention. You could not be everywhere at once. But Robb shakes his head, understanding with terrible clarity the chain of decisions that led to this moment. I chose vengeance over prudence. I executed Jaime Lannister when I should have held him for ransom. I invaded the Westerlands when I should have consolidated our position in the north. Every choice I made brought us closer to this catastrophe. The weight of kingship has never felt heavier than it does in this moment, surrounded by the consequences of decisions made in anger and grief and the desperate desire for justice. Every path Robb chose seemed right at the time, but each led inexorably toward the disaster that has now consumed his family and kingdom. "What are your orders, Your Grace?" Lord Umber asks, though his tone suggests he already knows what must come next. "We march north," Robb declares, moving to the window that looks out over the snow-covered passes. "Winterfell must be reclaimed. My brothers must be avenged. The Ironborn must pay for their treachery." "Your Grace," Catelyn interjects, her voice carrying the desperate urgency of someone who sees catastrophe looming. The passes are already closing. Winter has come early and hard. To march north now would be to lead what remains of our army to destruction in the mountain snows. "Then what would you have me do?" Robb turns to face his advisors, his blue eyes burning with pain and frustrated rage. "Stay here while Ironborn raiders hold my family's seat? Let Theon Greyjoy sit in my father's chair while my brothers lie unavenged in their graves?" The impossible nature of their situation becomes clear to everyone in the chamber. To stay means abandoning the north to enemy occupation, leaving Winterfell in Ironborn hands, while winter tightens its grip on the kingdom. But to leave means abandoning their position in the Westerlands, throwing away the strategic gains purchased with so much blood and sacrifice. "There is a third option," Lord Karstark says slowly, his voice carrying the weight of a suggestion he knows will be unwelcome. "We could negotiate, approach Tywin Lannister under flag of truce, offer terms for safe passage north in exchange for our withdrawal from the Westerlands." The silence that greets this proposal speaks to its recognition as both practical necessity and devastating admission of failure. To negotiate with the enemy after all they have suffered, all they have sacrificed, feels like betrayal of every man who died to bring them this far. "Negotiate!" Robb repeats the word as if tasting something bitter. "With the man who ordered my father's execution? With the family that murdered prisoners and burned innocent villages? What terms could we possibly offer that would make our withdrawal worth more than our destruction?" "Your Grace," Sir Wendell Manderley says carefully, "perhaps we should consider what Lord Karstark suggests. The alternative is to watch our army freeze to death in these mountains while the north burns behind us." Before Robb can respond, another complication arrives in the form of a second raven, this one bearing news that transforms their desperate situation into something approaching catastrophe. The Maester who brings this message looks as though he has aged another decade in the span of minutes. "Your Grace," he begins, his voice barely above a whisper. "Word from Riverrun. Lady Catelyn, she was captured 3 days ago while traveling with a small escort toward the Twins. Taken by Ironborn raiders, who somehow penetrated deep into the Riverlands." The news hits like a hammer blow to an already reeling army. Catelyn Stark, the bridge between North and Riverlands, the diplomatic link that held their alliance together, has been taken by the same enemies who destroyed Winterfell and murdered her youngest sons. "How?" Catelyn asks, though her voice suggests she already dreads the answer. "The message is unclear, my lady. Raiders struck at night, overwhelmed the escort, took you prisoner along with several other ladies of important houses. Lord Edmure believes they were acting on orders from the Iron Islands, perhaps seeking hostages for negotiations." The political implications cascade through Robb's mind with sickening clarity. Not only has he lost his ancient seat and his brothers, but now his mother, the woman whose marriage created the alliance between North and Riverlands, has been captured by enemies who understand exactly how valuable she is. "This changes everything," Lord Karstark observes grimly. "Without Lady Catelyn's presence to maintain the alliance, how long before the Riverlords begin questioning their commitment to our cause?" The question hangs in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. The Northern Riverlands alliance has always been built on personal relationships as much as political convenience, and with Catelyn missing and the war's cost mounting daily, those relationships face strain they may not survive. Robb moves to the window again, staring out at the snow that continues to fall like a shroud over his hopes and ambitions. The crown of winter sits on his head, but the kingdom it represents seems to slip further from his grasp with each piece of catastrophic news. "Your Grace," Lord Umber says quietly, recognizing the weight of leadership that crushes down on his young king's shoulders. "Whatever you decide, we're with you. North, south, east, west, wherever you lead, we follow." The loyalty in the giant's voice is absolute and unquestioning, but it only adds to the burden Robb carries. These men have followed him across hundreds of leagues, bled for his cause, lost friends and family in pursuit of justice that seems ever more distant and costly. "I need to think," Robb says finally, his voice carrying exhaustion that goes deeper than physical weariness. "Give me the night. Tomorrow I'll decide our course." As his advisors file out of the chamber, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the weight of impossible choices, Robb Stark contemplates the ruins of everything he has tried to build. The war that began with such clear moral purpose, justice for his father, punishment for his family's enemies, has become something far more complex and terrible. Outside, the snow continues to fall, each flake another barrier between his army and home, another day closer to the decision that will determine not just his own fate, but the survival of everything his ancestors built over thousands of years. The boy who executed Jaime Lannister for justice has become a king forced to choose between saving his kingdom and avenging his family, between honor and survival, between the crown he wears and the people who placed it on his head. Winter has come to the mountains, and with it the knowledge that some choices can never be undone, some prices are too high to pay, and some victories cost more than any defeat. The war enters its most desperate phase, where kings must choose between impossible options and live with consequences that will echo through the ages. In the growing darkness of winter's embrace, Robb Stark faces the moment that will define not just his reign, but the very survival of the North itself. The twins rise from the marshy ground like twin daggers thrust into the heart of the Riverlands, their ancient towers connected by the stone bridge that has controlled passage across the Green Fork for 600 years. As Robb Stark's depleted army approaches through the morning mist, the banners of House Frey flutter from every battlement, twin blue towers on silver fields that have welcomed travelers and armies for countless generations. But today, those banners seem more like warnings than welcomes. Robb rides at the head of his column with Grey Wind, padding silently beside his destrier, the great direwolf's red eyes scanning the approaches to the castle with an alertness that speaks to instincts honed by months of warfare. The beast has grown massive during the campaign, his shoulders now reaching above a man's chest, his presence commanding respect and fear from enemies who have learned to associate his howl with death and destruction. The crown of winter sits upon Robb's head, but the young king who wears it bears little resemblance to the idealistic boy who first accepted the burden of leadership. His face has been carved lean by the hardships of campaign, his blue eyes reflecting depths that speak of decisions that cost him pieces of his soul. The auburn hair that once marked him as Ned Stark's son now frames features harder and more dangerous than his father ever possessed. Behind him ride the remnant of the great host that marched so confidently into the Westerlands just months ago. 5,000 men, the survivors of battles and winter marches that have winnowed away the weak and left only the hardest fighters. These are veterans now, soldiers who have seen too much death to fear it, and too much betrayal to trust easily. The castle looks quiet, observes Lord Rickard Karstark, his weathered face marked by suspicion as he studies the twins' defensive positions. Too quiet for a fortress that should be celebrating our return. Robb nods, noting the same details that have caught his advisor's attention. The walls are fully manned, but the soldiers move with the nervous energy of men preparing for battle rather than the relaxed alertness of guards welcoming expected guests. Gates that should stand open in greeting remain closed, and the bridge spanning the river shows no sign of preparation for the passage of a royal army. "Walder Frey plays games," Lord Greatjon Umber rumbles, his massive hand resting on the pommel of his sword with casual readiness. "Always has, always will. The question is what game he's playing now." The truth of that observation weighs heavily on Robb's mind as he considers the political realities that have brought him to this moment. The Freys hold the only practical crossing of the Green Fork for hundreds of miles, making them essential to any northern army seeking passage between the Riverlands and their homeland. But their loyalty has always been conditional, purchased with promises that grow more expensive with each defeat and disaster. "Send word that the king in the north requests passage," Robb commands, his voice carrying the authority of a man who has learned that sometimes survival depends on observing the proper forms, even when treachery lurks behind courtesy. "Remind Lord Walder of our agreement, and the services his house has provided to our cause." The herald who carries this message returns within the hour, his face bearing news that confirms Robb's growing suspicions about their reception at the twins. "Lord Walder will receive you, Your Grace," the herald reports, "but he requests that you attend a feast in your honor this evening. He wishes to celebrate your return and discuss renewed terms for the alliance between your houses." The phrase "renewed terms" sends a chill through the gathered commanders that has nothing to do with the autumn air. In the language of political necessity, such words usually mean that previous agreements are no longer adequate and that new prices must be paid for continued cooperation. "What manner of renewed terms?" Robb asks, though he suspects he already knows the answer. "Lord Walder spoke of marriages, Your Grace. He believes that recent losses require stronger bonds between the allied houses." The implication is clear to everyone within hearing. Walder Frey intends to extract additional payment for his continued support, likely in the form of marriages that will bind the northern houses more tightly to his own family's interests. Given the military situation and their desperate need for passage, they have little choice but to listen to whatever demands the Lord of the Crossing wishes to make. But something in the herald's manner, some subtle tension in his voice, sets alarm bells ringing in Robb's mind. The young king has learned to read the signs of danger in men's faces and voices, skills purchased with blood and betrayal over the long months of warfare. "Grey wind," he says quietly, and the great direwolf's ears prick forward with immediate attention. The bond between king and beast has grown stronger through shared battles and hardships, until each can sense the other's moods and instincts with supernatural clarity. The direwolf's response is immediate and unmistakable, a low growl that rumbles through his chest like distant thunder, his hackles rising as his red eyes fix on the towers ahead. Whatever dangers wait within those walls, the beast can sense them with senses far keener than any human possesses. "What is it?" Lord Karstark asks, recognizing the significance of the direwolf's warning. "Treachery," Robb says simply, his hand moving to the pommel of his sword as he studies the twins with new eyes. Grey wind smells it. The question is what form it will take. The war council that convenes in the field outside the twins carries a gravity that speaks to the life and death nature of their situation. Every surviving commander understands that they stand at a crossroads where the wrong choice could mean the destruction of everything they have fought to preserve. "We could bypass the twins," suggests Sir Wendell Manderley, though his voice carries little conviction. "Find another crossing further upstream. Avoid whatever trap Lord Walder has prepared." And lose another week while Winterfell remains in Ironborn hands? Lord Umber shakes his massive head. "Every day we delay is another day our people suffer under occupation. We need to cross here, and cross now. Then we go in ready for war," Robb decides, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a king who has learned that survival sometimes requires terrible choices. "Full armor, weapons ready, guards posted at every entrance. If Walder Frey wants to play games with the lives of kings, he'll learn that some games carry prices higher than any man can afford to pay." The feast in the twins' great hall unfolds with all the pageantry Walder Frey can muster. But beneath the surface, courtesy lies and tension so thick it seems to press against the walls like gathering storm clouds. Long tables groan under the weight of food and wine. Musicians play cheerful melodies that sound somehow ominous in the vaulted chamber, and servants move between the guests with smiles that never quite reach their eyes. Robb sits at the high table with the crown of winter upon his head, his royal presence lending gravity to what should be a celebration of alliance and friendship. But his blue eyes never stop moving, cataloguing details that speak to preparation for violence rather than hospitality. Too many Frey men-at-arms line the walls, their hands resting too casually on weapon hilts. Too many exits are subtly blocked by servants who move with military precision. Most telling of all, Grey Wind paces restlessly beside the king's chair, his massive frame tense with barely contained aggression as his enhanced senses detect threats that human eyes cannot see. "Your Grace," Walder Frey says, as he raises his cup in toast, his aged voice carrying across the hall with the practiced delivery of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "To the king in the north, whose victories in the Westerlands have proven the courage of his followers and the justice of his cause." The words ring hollow in the great hall, and Robb notes how few of the assembled Freys meet his eyes during the toast. These are men preparing for treachery, their guilt written in their faces for those who know how to read such signs. "To House Frey," Robb replies formally, rising from his seat with his own cup raised high, "whose loyalty to our alliance has been proven on a dozen battlefields, and whose support has made victory possible." The counter-toast is calculated to remind everyone present of the bonds that should prevent betrayal, but Robb can see in Walder's ancient eyes that such considerations no longer carry weight with the Lord of the Crossing. As the feast continues through its elaborate courses, the tension in the hall grows until it becomes almost suffocating. Musicians play with forced enthusiasm, servants hurry through their duties with nervous efficiency, and the guests make conversation that sounds increasingly artificial and strained. Then the musicians begin playing "The Rains of Castamere." The Lannister song echoes through the hall like a declaration of war, its haunting melody carrying the promise of destruction for any house foolish enough to oppose the Golden Lions of the West. The choice of music is no accident. It is a signal, a notification to all present that allegiances have shifted and that the time for pretense has ended. Robb's hand moves to his sword hilt as Grey Wind's growl fills the sudden silence that follows the song's conclusion. Around the hall, Frey soldiers step forward from their positions along the walls, their weapons suddenly visible as the pretense of hospitality evaporates like morning mist. "Lord Walder," Robb says quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. "I believe we have matters to discuss." The old lord's smile is sharp and cold as winter winds. "Indeed we do, Your Grace. You see, the terms of our alliance have changed somewhat since your departure for the Westerlands. New arrangements have been made, new loyalties established, new prices agreed upon for safe passage through my domain." "What price?" Robb asks, though he already knows the answer from the positioning of armed men and the song choice that preceded this confrontation. "Your life," Walder Frey declares with the satisfaction of a man who believes he holds all the advantages. "Lord Tywin Lannister has made me an offer I cannot refuse. Gold enough to rebuild my castles, marriages that will elevate my house, and the promise of royal favor when the rightful king sits the Iron Throne." The betrayal hangs in the air like a blade poised to fall, but Robb shows no surprise at the revelation. The months of warfare have taught him to expect treachery from allies as much as enemies, and he has prepared for this possibility since Grey Wind first showed signs of unease. "I see," Robb says calmly, his blue eyes scanning the room with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. "And you believe you can simply murder a king under guest right and face no consequences for such violation of sacred law?" "Guest right?" Walder laughs, the sound harsh and bitter. "You forfeited guest right when you broke your marriage pact, when you failed to honor the agreements that bound our houses together. The gods care nothing for oath-breakers and murderers." The accusation stings because it carries enough truth to wound, but Robb has learned to live with the weight of choices that seemed right at the time, but led to unforeseen consequences. Every king must bear such burdens, and survival requires the strength to act despite regret. "Then you have chosen your path," Robb declares, rising from his seat with the crown of winter, catching the torchlight like iron stars. "And I have chosen mine." The signal comes not from words, but from Grey Wind's sudden surge forward, the great direwolf launching himself at the nearest Frey soldier, with a snarl that echoes through the hall like the voice of winter itself. The beast's massive jaws close around the man's throat before he can cry out, and his body hits the floor with the wet sound of torn flesh and spilled blood. But the direwolf's attack is only the beginning. Even as Grey Wind tears into the would-be assassins, the doors of the great hall burst open to admit Robb's own guards. Northern soldiers who have been positioned outside since their arrival, waiting for exactly this moment. The trap that Walder Frey intended to spring has become a snare that closes around his own men instead. Caught between Grey Wind's fury and the sudden appearance of armed northerners, the Frey soldiers find themselves overwhelmed before they can properly organize their attack. The battle in the Great Hall is brief but savage, a close-quarters melee where skill matters more than numbers, and where the element of surprise proves decisive. Robb draws his sword and cuts down 2 Frey men before they can reach his position, while around him his guards methodically slaughter enemies who expected to be carrying out an execution, not fighting for their lives. The turning of tables is complete within minutes. Where Walder Frey expected to present Tywin Lannister with the head of the king in the north, he instead finds his great hall carpeted with the bodies of his own soldiers, while Robb Stark stands unharmed among the carnage. "Yield," Robb commands, his sword point resting against the old lord's throat as Grey Wind prowls among the fallen, with blood dripping from his massive jaws. "Call for your remaining men to lay down their arms, and perhaps some of your family will live to see morning. The defeat is total and absolute. Walder Frey's gamble has failed catastrophically, leaving his house exposed to the vengeance of a king who has learned that mercy is often mistaken for weakness by those who mistake honor for naivety. "Spare the children," Robb orders as his men secure the castle and round up the surviving Freys. "Spare the women who took no part in this treachery, but every man who raised a sword against their rightful king dies tonight." The execution of the Frey conspirators unfolds with mechanical efficiency, each death a reminder that betraying the king in the north carries consequences that no amount of Lannister gold can prevent. But even in victory, even in justified vengeance, Robb shows the restraint that separates kings from tyrants. When dawn breaks over the twins, House Frey's military power has been destroyed, but their innocent members remain alive under the protection of Northern steel. The crossing belongs to Robb now, secured not through negotiation, but through the kind of decisive action that his enemies have learned to fear. "What now, Your Grace?" Lord Karstark asks, as they prepare to continue their march toward Winterfell. "Now we reclaim our home," Robb replies, watching as northern banners replace Frey towers on the castle walls. "And we show the Ironborn what happens to those who mistake northern honor for northern weakness. The war that began with the execution of Jaime Lannister has forged Robb Stark into something harder and more dangerous than his enemies anticipated. The boy who once hesitated to take life has become a king who understands that sometimes survival requires terrible choices, and that mercy must be earned rather than freely given." Grey wind howls from the battlements of the twins, his voice carrying across the marshland like a promise of winter's approach. The sound reaches every corner of the surrounding countryside, a reminder that the North remembers its own, and that some betrayals carry prices higher than any treasure can repay. The ancient seat of House Lannister rises from the western cliffs like a mountain carved by gods and men, its golden towers catching the first light of dawn, as they have for 3,000 years. Casterly Rock stands defiant against the grey sky, its massive walls hewn from living stone that has never yielded to siege or assault, its reputation as the most impregnable fortress in Westeros earned through centuries of failed attacks by ambitious enemies. But today, those unbreachable walls face a test unlike any in their long history. Robb Stark's army spreads across the coastal plains below the fortress like a tide of steel and fury, 15,000 men bearing banners that tell the story of a war fought across the length and breadth of Westeros. The grey direwolf of Stark leads them all, but around it flutter the standards of houses that have paid dearly for their loyalty. The mailed fist of Glover, the battle-axe of Serwyn, the silver eagle of Mallister, and now, taken from fallen enemies, the twin towers of Frey. The king in the north sits his destrier at the edge of the great siege camp, the crown of winter upon his head, catching the morning light like iron stars. The young man who wears it has been transformed by the crucible of war into something harder and more dangerous than his enemies ever imagined possible. His face bears the lean sculpture of command, his blue eyes reflecting depths that speak of choices paid for in blood and sorrow. Grey wind pads beside his king's horse, the great direwolf's massive frame now approaching the size of a small pony. The beast's red eyes scan the fortress walls with predatory interest, as if sensing the fear of the men who huddle behind stone and mortar, while their enemies gather strength in the valley below. "It's magnificent," observes Lord Rickard Karstark, his weathered face showing grudging admiration for the engineering marvel that rises before them. "No wonder it's never fallen to assault. Those walls are carved from the living rock itself." "Walls can be climbed," Robb replies quietly, his voice carrying the confidence of a commander who has learned that no fortress is truly impregnable when besieged by men with nothing left to lose. "Gates can be broken. Even mountains can be worn down by patient water and persistent wind. The strategic situation is unlike anything the war has produced thus far. Tywin Lannister has gathered the remnants of his forces behind the most defensible position in Westeros, but those remnants number barely 8,000 men, less than half the strength Robb commands. The Golden Lord has chosen to make his final stand in the seat of his power, betting everything on walls that have never been breached and defenses that have turned back every previous invader. Our scouts report unusual activity in the castle, Lord Gratian Umber says, his massive frame bristling with barely contained eagerness for battle. Smoke from the forges, movement on the walls, but no signs of preparation for sally or counterattack. They're not planning to come out, Robb observes, studying the fortress through a spyglass that reveals details hidden from the naked eye. Tywin means to make us come to him, to break ourselves against his walls until we lose heart and withdraw. The siege lines that take shape over the following days represent the accumulated wisdom of a military campaign that has taught hard lessons about the cost of hasty action. Instead of the desperate assaults that marked his earlier battles, Robb establishes a methodical investment designed to strangle the fortress slowly and systematically. Trenches snake across the coastal plain in careful patterns that protect the besiegers, while denying the defenders any route of escape. Catapults and trebuchets rise like mechanical giants, their wooden frames assembled with the patient skill of engineers who understand that siege warfare is won through persistence rather than heroic charges. Most importantly, a careful blockade closes off every approach to Casterly Rock by land and sea, ensuring that no supplies can reach the defenders and no messages can escape to summon relief forces that no longer exist in sufficient numbers to matter. How long can they hold? Robb asks his siege engineers as they review their calculations of the fortress's likely supplies and defensive capacity. Months, Your Grace, if they've prepared properly, comes the sobering answer. Casterly Rock was built to withstand extended siege. Its cisterns can supply water for years. Its storehouses can feed thousands through the longest winter. But time is an enemy that works for both sides in this confrontation. Every day the siege continues is another day for potential relief forces to organize, another day for political situations to shift, another day for the careful coalition Robb has built to face new pressures and temptations. The first attempt at negotiation comes on the 5th day of the siege, when a white banner appears on the castle walls and a small party emerges under flag of truce. At their head rides a figure whose presence transforms the entire nature of the confrontation, Tyrion Lannister, the dwarf lord whose quick wit and political acumen have made him valuable despite his family's increasingly desperate circumstances. The parley takes place in a pavilion erected between the siege lines and the fortress walls, a neutral ground where enemies can meet without immediate fear of treachery. Tyrion approaches with the measured dignity of a man who understands that he may be negotiating for his family's survival, while Robb meets him with the authority of a king who holds every advantage except time. Your Grace, Tyrion begins, his voice carrying the practiced charm that has served him well in more diplomatic circumstances. I come seeking terms that might end this siege without further bloodshed. Terms? Robb's smile is sharp and cold. What terms could possibly interest me when I hold your family's ancestral seat under siege and your father trapped within its walls? The dwarf lord spreads his hands in a gesture that might be supplication or resignation. Practical terms, Your Grace. Terms that recognize the realities of our situation and offer benefits to both sides. Speak them. Safe passage for all non-combatants within the castle, Tyrion begins, his tone suggesting he has rehearsed these words carefully. Exile rather than execution for my father and the military commanders who served him. Recognition of Lannister, claims to certain holdings in the Westerlands that pose no threat to northern independence. The terms are reasonable by the standards of traditional warfare, generous even by the measures that have governed conflicts between great houses for centuries. But this war abandoned such civilized constraints long ago when Robb executed Jaime Lannister and Cersei responded with Ned Stark's death. Exile, Robb repeats the word as if tasting something distasteful, for the man who ordered my father's execution, for the lord who burned villages and murdered prisoners in response to my quest for justice? My father is a hard man, Tyrion admits, but he is not without honor in his own fashion. He fought for his family as you fight for yours. Surely there is room for mercy between enemies who recognize each other's motivations. Mercy, Robb says quietly, and his tone carries memories of every hard lesson the war has taught him. I offered mercy once, Lord Tyrion. I held your brother prisoner when I could have executed him immediately. I hoped that mercy might purchase similar treatment for my own family. He gestures toward the fortress that looms above them, its walls now bristling with defensive preparations. That mercy purchased me nothing but my father's death and the devastation of innocent people throughout the Riverlands. Your family taught me that mercy is a luxury I cannot afford. Tyrion nods slowly, recognizing the justice in Robb's position, even as he regrets its implications for his own family's fate. Then there can be no negotiation, no terms that might spare unnecessary bloodshed. One term, Robb replies, his voice carrying the finality of a king who has made his decision. Unconditional surrender. Your father yields himself to my justice. His commanders submit to northern authority, and Casterly Rock opens its gates without resistance. And in return? No massacre of the innocent. Fair treatment for those who played no part in the crimes that brought us to this moment. Justice rather than vengeance for those who must face consequences for their choices. The distinction is crucial, separating the king in the north from the kind of tyrant who rules through terror alone. Robb has learned to be ruthless when necessary, but he retains enough of his father's honor to distinguish between legitimate targets and innocents caught in the machinery of war. I will carry your terms to my father, Tyrion says formally, rising from the camp chair where he has conducted this final negotiation, though I suspect I already know his answer. As do I, Robb agrees. Tywin Lannister will never yield while he draws breath, which means this siege will end only when one of us is dead. The negotiations collapse as expected, but they serve a purpose beyond their stated diplomatic goals. Word of the reasonable terms Robb offered spreads through both armies, reaching men who must decide whether to fight to the death for a lost cause or seek accommodation with a king who promises justice rather than slaughter. Within Casterly Rock's walls, the effect is immediate and devastating. Lords who followed Tywin out of loyalty or fear begin questioning whether continued resistance serves any purpose beyond prolonging inevitable defeat. Common soldiers whisper of wives and children who might be better served by surrender than by futile resistance that will only increase the final price of failure. Lord Liddon has requested private audience, reports Sir Kevan Lannister, his voice heavy with the implications of such defection among Tywin's most trusted bannermen. Lord Lefford speaks openly of the futility of continued resistance. Even Sir Adam questions whether the cost of holding this fortress justifies the likely consequences. Tywin receives these reports in the great hall of Casterly Rock with the stoic dignity that has defined his long career as Lord and Commander. The man who once inspired fear throughout the Seven Kingdoms now faces the dissolution of loyalty that inevitably accompanies clear and present defeat. "Let them go," he says quietly, his voice carrying resignation that would have seemed impossible in the proud lord who once ruled through reputation and ruthless efficiency. "Any man who wishes to seek terms with the Northern King has my leave to do so. I will not hold others to oaths that may cost them everything." But even as his support crumbles and his position becomes increasingly hopeless, Tywin Lannister refuses to yield. The Lion of Casterly Rock has spent his entire adult life building a reputation that made his enemies tremble at the mere mention of his name. To surrender now would be to admit that all of that effort, all of that careful construction of power and fear, had been meaningless in the face of northern determination. The final assault begins at dawn on the 13th day of the siege, when Robb's engineers signal that their preparations are complete. Catapults launch stone projectiles that shatter against walls designed to withstand such bombardment. But the real attack comes from below, where sappers have spent days undermining key sections of the fortress's foundation. The explosions that rock Casterly Rock shake the ancient stronghold to its very bones, opening gaps in walls that have stood for millennia and creating the breaches that northern infantry pour through like water through a cracked dam. The fighting within the castle is savage but brief, a close-quarters melee where superior numbers and desperate fury overcome defensive advantages and familiarity with terrain. Room by room, corridor by corridor, Robb's forces advance through the fortress that has never fallen to assault, leaving a trail of defeated enemies in their wake. The final confrontation comes in the Great Hall, where Tywin Lannister has ruled the Westerlands for more than 40 years. The aging lord stands alone before his throne, his sword in his hand, and his pale green eyes reflecting the kind of dignity that can only come from absolute certainty in one's own principles. Robb enters the hall with grey wind at his side and the crown of winter upon his head, his presence filling the ancient chamber with the authority of a king who has earned his title through blood and sacrifice. The two men who have shaped the course of this war face each other across a space that might as well be an ocean, separated by choices and consequences that can never be undone. "Tywin Lannister," Robb says formally, his voice echoing in the vaulted chamber, "I accuse you of ordering the execution of my father, Ned Stark. I accuse you of waging war against innocent civilians in violation of every law of gods and men. I accuse you of the murder of prisoners and the destruction of villages whose only crime was loyalty to their rightful lords." "I regret nothing," Tywin replies, his voice carrying the same iron certainty that has defined his approach to leadership throughout his long career. "I did what was necessary to protect my family and preserve my house. Every choice I made served those goals, and I would make them again if given the opportunity." The honesty of the admission strips away any possibility of reconciliation or compromise. These are not men who can find common ground through negotiation or shared understanding. This conflict can end only with the complete victory of one side and the utter defeat of the other. "Then we understand each other perfectly," Robb says, drawing his sword with the fluid motion of a warrior who has learned to kill efficiently and without hesitation. "Single combat. Winner takes all. Your death ends this war. Your victory gives you the chance to face my army with whatever strength you have left." Tywin's smile is sharp and predatory, the expression of a man who has spent his entire life preparing for moments exactly like this one. "Agreed. But know this, boy king. I have been killing men since before you were born. Your youth and your cause will not save you when cold steel meets warm flesh. The duel that follows is witnessed by soldiers from both armies, men who understand that they are watching the conclusion of a conflict that has consumed the Seven Kingdoms and cost thousands of lives. The great hall of Casterly Rock becomes an arena where the fate of kingdoms will be decided by the skill and will of two men who represent everything their respective sides have fought to achieve. Tywin fights with the precision and economy of a master swordsman, his blade moving in patterns perfected through decades of practice and actual combat. He is older than Robb, less physically powerful, but his experience shows in every parry and riposte as he seeks the single opening that will end the duel in his favor. But Robb has advantages that his older opponent lacks: youth, strength, and most importantly, the desperate fury of a man fighting for justice long delayed. His attacks come with relentless pressure that gradually forces Tywin backward, each exchange of blows taking a toll that the aging lord cannot afford to pay. The end comes suddenly, as it often does in single combat. Tywin's guard drops for just an instant as fatigue takes its toll, and Robb's blade finds the gap between gorget and breastplate with surgical precision. The Lion of Casterly Rock falls to his knees, then forward onto the stone floor where his blood spreads in patterns that will stain the ancient hall forever. "It is finished," Robb declares, his voice carrying to every corner of the great hall and beyond, to the courtyards where both armies wait to learn the outcome of their leaders' confrontation. With Tywin's death, the last organized resistance in the Westerlands crumbles like a dam giving way to flood waters. Lords who fought for the Golden Lion now compete to offer their submissions to the king in the north, recognizing that continued defiance serves no purpose beyond ensuring their own destruction. The war that began with the execution of Jaime Lannister in the Whispering Wood has reached its conclusion in the great hall of Casterly Rock, where the last great champion of House Lannister lies dead at the feet of the king he could not defeat. Justice has been served, vengeance has been achieved, and the North has proven that even the mightiest houses can fall when they face enemies with nothing left to lose. Grey wind howls from the battlements of the conquered fortress, his voice carrying across the western sea like a proclamation of victory. The sound reaches every corner of the Westerlands, announcing that a new order has come to the Seven Kingdoms, and that the age of Lannister domination has ended forever. The morning sun rises over a transformed Westeros, its golden light falling upon a realm where the old certainties have been swept away like leaves before winter wind. From the fallen towers of King's Landing to the conquered battlements of Casterly Rock, from the ancient walls of Winterfell to the captured bridges of the Twins, the Seven Kingdoms awakens to a new reality, shaped by choices made in blood and paid for in sacrifice. Robb Stark stands on the battlements of the Red Keep, the crown of winter upon his head, catching the early light as he surveys the city that sprawls beneath the ancient fortress, like a great wounded beast slowly healing from its injuries. The capital that once seemed the center of all power in Westeros now appears diminished, humbled by the knowledge that kingdoms can rise and fall based on the will of those strong enough to seize their destiny. Below him in the courtyard, northern banners fly alongside the standards of houses that chose survival over stubborn loyalty to a lost cause. The grey direwolf of Stark dominates them all, but around it flutter the sigils of lords who recognized that accommodation with victory serves their people better than martyrdom for a defeated regime. "The city is secure, Your Grace," reports Sir Wendell Manderly, his round face bearing satisfaction as he delivers news of the bloodless transition that followed the collapse of Lannister resistance. The gold cloaks opened the gates without resistance once word arrived of Lord Tywin's death, Queen Cersei, took her own life rather than face capture. The news carries no satisfaction for Robb, only the weary recognition that even victory demands prices he would prefer not to pay. Cersei Lannister died as she lived, defiant, proud, and unwilling to accept a world that did not bend to her will. Her death removes a threat, but also eliminates any possibility of justice for the crimes she committed in the name of family loyalty. And King Joffrey? Fled, Sir Wendell continues, during the night with whatever loyal guards remained. Our scouts believe he's sailing for Essos, though his ultimate destination remains unknown. The young usurper's escape frustrates Robb's desire for complete justice, but it also removes a source of continued resistance that might have prolonged the conflict indefinitely. Sometimes the defeated enemy who flees serves the victor's interests better than the one who fights to the death. Sansa, Robb asks, and his voice carries the weight of personal concern that transcends political calculation. Safe, Your Grace. Frightened, malnourished, but alive. She's been asking for you constantly since our forces secured the Red Keep. The reunion with his sister takes place in the God's Wood of the Red Keep, beneath the ancient weirwood that has stood witness to countless moments of joy and sorrow throughout the long history of the Targaryen and Baratheon dynasties. Sansa waits beside the heart tree, with the nervous stillness of someone who has learned to fear hope as much as despair. When Robb approaches, she looks up with blue eyes that carry too much knowledge of the world's cruelty for someone barely past her 16th name day. The girl who once dreamed of marrying princes and living in fairy tales has been replaced by a young woman who understands that survival requires strength rather than innocence. "Brother," she says quietly, the single word carrying months of pain and longing and desperate hope that this moment is real rather than another cruel dream. Robb gathers her into his arms with the careful gentleness of someone holding something precious that might break at the slightest rough treatment. The crown of winter presses against her auburn hair as he holds her close, feeling the fragility of the sister he has spent so long fighting to save. "You're safe now," he murmurs, though both of them understand that safety is a relative concept in a world where kingdoms rise and fall based on the ambitions of those willing to pay any price for power. "You're home, you're with family. No one will hurt you again." The promise carries the weight of a king's oath, backed by armies that have proven their ability to bring down even the mightiest houses when justice demands it. But it also carries the knowledge that such protection comes at costs that echo far beyond the immediate moment of rescue. As they stand together in the God's Wood, Grey Wind emerges from the shadows with the silent grace that has made him legend throughout the Seven Kingdoms. The great direwolf approaches Sansa with careful dignity, allowing her to touch his massive head with hands that still shake from months of captivity and abuse. "He's grown," Sansa observes, wonder replacing fear in her voice as she feels the warmth of the creature that has become symbol of northern power and justice. "We all have," Robb replies, and his tone carries recognition of transformations that go far deeper than physical growth or political position. The negotiations that follow the fall of King's Landing unfold with the careful precision of diplomatic dance performed by partners who understand that their steps will determine the shape of kingdoms for generations to come. In the throne room of the Red Keep, beneath the twisted metal of the Iron Throne that has symbolized absolute power for 3 centuries, representatives of the great houses gather to witness the birth of a new political order. Tyrion Lannister stands before the gathered lords with the dignity of a man who has chosen pragmatism over pride, survival over martyrdom, The Dwarf Lord's decision to work with the victorious North, rather than flee with the remnants of his family's regime, speaks to political wisdom that transcends personal loyalty. Lords and ladies of the Seven Kingdoms, Robb begins, his voice carrying the authority of a king who has earned his crown through blood and sacrifice, rather than inheritance alone. We gather to establish the terms by which this realm will be governed in the wake of recent changes. The assembled nobles listen with the attention of people who understand that their futures depend on decisions made in this moment. Some faces show resignation, others calculation, but all recognize that the old order has passed and that adaptation to new realities offers their best hope for preserving whatever power and position they can maintain. The North withdraws from the Seven Kingdoms, Robb continues, his words falling into the throne room like stones dropped into still water. We claim our independence as a sovereign realm, bound by treaty and mutual interest, but not by oath or feudal obligation. The declaration sends ripples of reaction through the assembled lords. Northern independence represents the formal fracturing of Aegon's kingdom, the acknowledgement that the unity forged by Dragonfire 3 centuries ago has finally succumbed to the centrifugal forces that have always threatened to tear the realm apart. In return, Robb continues, we offer friendship and alliance to those kingdoms that recognize our sovereignty, trade agreements that benefit all parties, military cooperation against external threats, the peaceful resolution of disputes through negotiation rather than warfare. Lord Tyrion steps forward, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber as he speaks for those lords who have chosen accommodation over continued resistance. The surviving lords of the Westerlands accept these terms, he declares formally. We recognize the sovereignty of the North and offer our friendship to King Robb Stark, first of his name, King in the North and King of the Rivers and Hills. The title encompasses the political reality that has emerged from the war's conclusion, not just northern independence, but effective control over the riverlands that have paid such a terrible price for their loyalty to House Stark. The alliance between North and Riverlands has been sealed in blood and consecrated through shared sacrifice that transcends traditional feudal bonds. Other declarations follow, as lords calculate their best interests in light of the new political reality. Some offer immediate recognition and alliance, others request time to consult with their own vassals and advisors. But the pattern is clear. The North's victory has created a new center of power that cannot be ignored or dismissed. From Dragonstone, a raven arrives, bearing Stannis Baratheon's response to the changed situation. The rightful heir to Robert's throne acknowledges northern independence with the grudging respect of a man who recognizes strength when he encounters it. But he makes clear that any southern expansion will meet fierce resistance from those who still honor traditional claims. From Storm's End comes word that Renly has abandoned his own claim to the Iron Throne, choosing instead to consolidate his power in the Stormlands and await opportunities that may emerge from the realm's continued fragmentation. The youngest Baratheon brother has always been pragmatic above all else, and he recognizes that discretion serves his interests better than futile gestures of defiance. No word comes from Essos, where Daenerys Targaryen continues her exile in ignorance of the opportunities that northern victory has created for anyone bold enough to claim a throne left vacant by the collapse of Lannister power. The last scion of the Dragon Lords remains focused on hatching ancient eggs, while the kingdoms that should be her birthright reshape themselves according to new rules and different dreams. At the Wall, Jon Snow receives news of his family's triumph with emotions too complex for simple celebration. The bastard who chose duty over blood watches ravens arrive with reports of northern independence and Stark victories, feeling the pull of bonds that his vows cannot entirely sever. "Your place is here," Lord Commander Mormont reminds him, as they stand on the wall's ice-covered battlements, looking out over the haunted forest that stretches endlessly toward the unknown north. The realm's political arrangements matter less than the defense against threats that know nothing of crowns and kingdoms. "I know my duty," Jon replies, but his voice carries the weight of choices that grow more difficult with each report of his family's success. The Night's Watch needs every sword it can command, but the knowledge that his brother has achieved justice for their father's murder while he stands watch over an empty wilderness tests his resolve in ways that no amount of training could prepare him for. The rebuilding of Winterfell begins with ceremonies that honor both the dead and the living, remembrance and renewal intertwined in rituals that stretch back to the dawn of northern history. The great hall that the Ironborn left scarred and blackened is restored with timber from the Wolfswood and stone quarried from the same hills that provided materials for the original construction 8,000 years ago. Robb oversees the work with the attention of a king who understands that symbols matter as much as substance in the business of ruling. Every beam raised, every stone laid, every banner hung speaks to the permanence of northern independence and the determination of its people to preserve what they have fought so hard to achieve. "The Maester's Tower needs new books," observes Maester Luwin, as he surveys the reconstruction with the practical eye of someone who has served House Stark through triumph and disaster alike. The Ironborn burned much of the library, including records that stretch back to the Age of Heroes. "Then we'll commission new books," Robb decides. "Chronicles that tell the true story of this war, histories that future generations can learn from, accounts that honor those who died for northern freedom." The task represents more than mere record-keeping. It is the conscious creation of a narrative that will define how future Northerners understand their independence and the price paid to achieve it. Every choice made in these early days will echo through generations, shaping the identity of a kingdom that has chosen its own path rather than accepting dominion from distant rulers. As winter settles over the north, with the promise of the longest, coldest season in living memory, Robb finds himself drawn again and again to the godswood of Winterfell, seeking the quiet reflection that only the heart tree can provide. The ancient weirwood's carved face seems to watch him with eyes that have witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, the birth and death of dynasties, the endless cycle of ambition and consequence that defines human history. "Was it worth it?" he asks the ancient tree, speaking aloud the question that haunts his quiet moments. All the death, all the suffering, all the choices that can never be undone. Was justice worth such a price? The heart tree offers no answer beyond the whisper of wind through bare branches and the soft sound of snow falling on ground that will not see spring for years to come. But in that silence, Robb finds a kind of peace that comes from knowing he chose the path of honor, even when it led through valleys of shadow and sacrifice. Grey wind emerges from the forest depths to join his vigil, the great direwolf settling beside his king with the patient dignity of a creature that has shared every trial and triumph of the long campaign. Together, they sit in the growing darkness, man and beast united by bonds forged in fire and blood, and the knowledge that some victories can only be purchased with pieces of the soul. The crown of winter rests heavy on Robb's head, but it is a weight he has learned to bear with the strength that comes from knowing his people are free, his family is safe, and justice has been served according to the old ways and the stern demands of honor. The boy who executed Jaime Lannister in pursuit of vengeance has become a king who understands that true victory lies not in conquest, but in the protection of those who depend on his strength and wisdom. Winter has come to the north, but it finds a kingdom at peace with itself, secure in its independence, and ready to face whatever challenges the future may bring. The war that began with a single act of justice has ended with the birth of a new realm, one where the ancient words of House Stark, "Winter is coming," carry the promise of endurance rather than the threat of destruction. In the godswood of Winterfell, as snow falls like benediction on the sacred grove, the king in the north keeps watch over his people and dreams of springs yet to come, when the children who will inherit his choices can walk free beneath northern skies and know that they owe allegiance to no crown but their own